Chapter 773. Great Chief, what's that? It sounds like he's the chief of all the clans. Isn't that the same as the three gods' emissary? There was a lot of discussion. Just then, the chief of the Blackwater clan, who had dropped to the 4th place, jumped onto the stage and questioned loudly, "But you said that Roland Wimbledon was the king of the Northern Kingdom. If he wasn't a Majin, how could he rule the entire desert?" "Here it comes," Ashes thought to herself. This was one of the key problems in bringing the southernmost region into Greycastle. Now, it was up to Echo how to deal with it. Echo looked at him and asked calmly, "So the three gods' emissary who once ruled the desert, were all Majins?" Her voice was not loud, but it reverberated in everyone's ears through the transmission of magic power. The chief of the Blackwater clan was no exception. He could not help but be stunned. This. We all know that the answer is no." Seeing that he was speechless, Echo looked at the crowd again and said, "The three gods' emissary was a real giant. In the legends, they didn't look the same. Some had 4 legs and 3 hands, and some had many heads. But there's no doubt that they were not Majins." At this point, she suddenly raised her voice a lot. The few words left by the emissary became a common rule for the Majin Sand people to abide by. These laws engraved on the stone slabs happened to record the ruler of the desert. One was to receive the blessings of the three gods, and the other was to open up a vast and boundless oasis so that all the people could avoid hunger, thirst, and death. As long as one could do one of them, he should be the master of the southernmost region. The discussion suddenly quieted down. No one would object to the laws left by the three gods' emissary in the Land of Fire. In fact, even the holy duel was based on the distribution of power in the laws. But the three gods' emissary did make the desert evergreen. The chief of the Blackwater clan was unwilling to be ignored. He pointed at Echo and said loudly, "It said that thousands of years ago, this place itself was an oasis. Can the king of Greycastle also do that? Don't be blinded by false interests. With that kind of power, what's the difference between him and a god? So as long as he can bring a new oasis to the Sand people, you'll recognize his majesty as the master of the southernmost region, right?" Echo raised the corner of her mouth. "That's right. And it's not just me, I'm afraid the other clansmen also think so." The chief of the Blackwater tribe did not mention the first condition at all, and tied the opinions of most of the Sand Nation people to himself. It's true that His Majesty couldn't turn the southernmost region into a green land, but he was willing to take us into Greycastle and let us live by the lake and the forest, where we would never be threatened by thirst and sandstorms. Echo walked to the front of the stage and said word by word, "This is the promise given by His Majesty. He will bring a new oasis. And the vast and fertile north is the boundless oasis that will never fade." Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air and almost couldn't believe their ears. Thuram was equally shocked. So that was the real purpose of the Osha clan. This was the meaning of the new oasis and new order that Iron Axe had mentioned. It was the dream of all Majins to have an evergreen land. For those small clans who were unable to compete for the Iron Sand City, this temptation was even more unimaginable. Even if the big clans were hesitant and unwilling to see the order of the southernmost region change dramatically, they could not stop the spread of the news. Perhaps in less than half a month, this amazing news would be spread throughout the desert by the clansmen from the Silver Stream Oasis. No, this is simply nonsense. It's a lie, a deception. The chief of the Blackwater tribe shouted loudly, "Have you all forgotten the tragedy of the Black Bone clan and the Sandstone clan? It was because they believed the words of the Queen of Clearwater, Garcia, that they were killed and their clans exterminated. Give them an oasis and a water source? The cunning northerners won't do that. They'll only give you a pond, a fist-sized territory, and let you fight for it endlessly like in the southernmost region, and you'll have to work for them with your lives." Thuram sighed imperceptibly. If it had been before the holy duel, this speech would have indeed played an excellent deterrent role, but now it was too late. The benevolent image of the Osha clan had already spread throughout the small oasis. With a little guidance, It would not be difficult to make people form the same benevolent image of the king of the northern kingdom behind the Osha clan, and obviously, a benevolent person would not oppress the Sand Nation like the Queen of Clearwater. Moreover, challengers like Blackbone and Sandstone were willing to sell themselves to Garcia cheaply, which was enough to show the attraction of a place to live. Even if they knew it might be a trap, there would still be clansmen who went there with the mentality of giving it a try. If the king of Greycastle sincerely wanted to bring the southernmost region under his jurisdiction, this group of pioneers would inevitably become an example for more clans. As long as this was started, the whole clan's northward migration was almost a foregone conclusion. From creating a momentum to attract the attention of many clans, to creating a benevolent image by not killing a single person, to becoming the head of the clans through the indisputable holy duel, and at the same time, to making the other large clans who had been pardoned unwilling to turn against Osha in public, all these steps had obviously been planned long ago. He had thought that he would play a pivotal role in the Osha clan settling in Iron Sand City, but only now did he realize that he had only provided the clansmen that Osha needed, as well as information about the clans in Iron Sand City. As for the real plan, he was completely kept in the dark. The other side did not take settling in Iron Sand City seriously at all, and revenge would be a piece of cake for them. He had to admit that he was a little disappointed. But the disappointment only lasted for a moment, and Thuram soon cheered up again. If everything was as his new master said, Osha would undoubtedly become the head of the clans. Then, as a member of Osha, he would obviously benefit greatly from it. Compared to the bright future ahead, this little disappointment was nothing. As expected, Echo shook her head lightly. "You're wrong, Chief. What Garcia needs are mercenaries, not citizens. This is the biggest difference between her and His Majesty Roland." Because of this, she chose Blackbone and Sandstone, who were stronger in combat. But His Majesty is different. He sees all Majans as his people, so any clan can go to the Kingdom of Greycastle. It has nothing to do with the number of young men in the clan or the strength of the clan. He doesn't need the Sand Nation to work for him. No merciful king will sit by and watch his people die needlessly. But what's the price? We have to pay something, don't we? Chief Gwells of Wild Flame stood up. He won't help the Sand Nation for no reason, and I don't believe that there is such a thing in this world that doesn't care about rewards. He clenched his teeth. Tell me, I'm willing to accept. What His Majesty wants is very simple, that is, work, Echo said frankly. Echo said calmly, just like his millions and millions of people, work for the kingdom, work for themselves. Receive a salary, improve their lives, receive education, raise their children, this is all he wants. Just like this. Gwells could not help but be startled. That's right. A way to survive without fighting and struggling. Echo's tone rose again. Everyone knows that the Silver Stream Oasis is becoming fewer and fewer. When I was a child, I could occasionally see traces of oasis at the southern end of Endless Cape. But now, the white wasteland in the northwest is constantly expanding, and the oasis is turning into sand. Even the small oasis around Iron Sand City is smaller than before. Do the Majans plan to fight for survival by killing and dueling, soak their blood in the yellow sand, and finally disappear from the southernmost region with the oasis? Tell me, are you willing to accept this result? No, Your Majesty. I want to go with you, Your Majesty Silvermoon. Please take me with you. There was a burst of noise from the crowd, like a wave, spreading from the center of the high platform to the surroundings. Looking at the beautiful woman on the platform who had gathered the attention of many clans, Iron Axe could not help but kneel on one knee, a line of hot tears welling up in his eyes. This scene had appeared in his dreams countless times, especially on the night when Osha became a challenger. However, when he woke up from his dream, the clans no longer existed, and the princess became a slave. He had thought that he would never see such a day again. But now, what Echo had achieved was one step closer to his dream. This feeling made his eyes water, but his heart felt incomparably full and proud. Osha had finally received the three gods' favor. I know there are still people who have doubts, but the truth will prove everything. Echo raised her right hand and said loudly, "Those clans who are willing to go with me to the southern region of Greycastle can now pack up and set off for the small oasis. Those who come later, don't worry. I will leave some people in the oasis to guide any clans who want to go to the northern kingdom to a suitable place to live. As long as you abide by the laws of Greycastle, you will be people under the protection of His Majesty. Greycastle will always be open to you." No one knew who made the first cheer, but it was like a drop of ink falling into water, quickly creating ripples that quickly spread to the entire land of fire. The big clans were still silent, but compared to the others under the high platform, they seemed insignificant. For the first time, the voices of the clans from every corner of Silver Stream overwhelmed the voices of Iron Sand City. A crack appeared in the primitive and old-fashioned order. A new order was taking shape in the boiling cauldron of voices. It looked young and immature, but it exuded infinite vitality. People knelt down one after another, cheering for the new head of the clans, and bowing their heads to pay respect to the birth of the great chief. Not everyone had the courage to be a pioneer, but there were always some people who would give everything for the evergreen land in their hearts. That day, people's cheers spread endlessly in the land of fire. Chapter 774. Through the sigil of listening, Roland received the result of the last holy duel and everything that had happened in the land of fire that afternoon. He immediately called Maggie, Lightning, and Nana to his office. "A witch in Iron Sand City is seriously injured and needs your help." Roland looked at the three little girls in front of him, who were holding their heads high and chest out. "Get ready tonight and set off tomorrow. You don't have to fly too fast. Just arrive at Fallen Dragon Ridge before dark and arrive at Iron Sand City the next day. Ashes will meet you there." "Are we both going?" Lightning pointed at herself and Maggie. "Yes, I'll be relieved when you two are together." He nodded and said, "And Maggie alone can't tie Nana to her back, can she? Remember to wear more clothes. It's not easy to fly in this weather." Nana looked at the falling snow outside the window and could not help shivering. "Got it. I'll deliver it on time, coo." Maggie raised her hand and said, "It's not a problem to fly there." Lightning pouted and said, "But you have to wait for me to come back to explore the snow mountain. If I miss such a great adventure, I'll cry." Well, the appearance of the greatest explorer crying. That's a moment worth recording. Looking at the little girl's serious eyes, Roland could not help laughing. He knew that Lightning had been looking forward to it for a long time since the news that there might be relics in the Great Snow Mountain spread. "Of course, you're all indispensable members of the exploration team. I can promise you that." "Then it's a deal." She was relieved and patted her chest. "Leave the injured sisters to us. You can treat the other Sand Nation people on the way, but don't stay too long," Roland finally ordered. "After Nana uses up her magic power, set off on the same day and take the same route as when we left. Do you understand?" The migration of the Tequila survivors was coming to an end and the exploration of the Snow Mountain was about to begin. However, if Nana was not in Neverwinter, he did not dare to let the witches go to that unknown place rashly. "Yes, Your Majesty." "All right. Goo." The three of them answered in unison. When they left, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "So you've successfully conquered the southernmost region?" Nightingale poked her head out from behind. "I can only say that I've taken the first step." Roland smiled. "There are still many things to do." At this point, after more than a month of fighting, the desert operation had finally come to an end. However, the upcoming migration was the highlight of the show. He spread out the map on the corner of the mahogany table and set his eyes on the southern border of Greycastle. He had told Iron Axe everything about giving the Sand Nation a new oasis before he set off, and his first choice was the borderland which had lost its lord and a large population. After the continuous civil war between Timothy and Garcia, the port of Clearwater, Eagle City, and other major cities had been reduced to ruins, and many of the surrounding towns and farmlands had also been destroyed. As more and more refugees moved into Neverwinter, the southern territory became more and more deserted. Instead of leaving it there to grow grass, it was better to let the Sand Nation enter the southern territory to reclaim the land and rebuild the port of Clearwater along the border between the desert and the green land. In this way, the workers who mined the Blackwater could set off from the port of Clearwater and go to the southern end of the desert by sea. According to Iron Axe's report, most of the underground sticks were located in the south of the Land of Fire, and the most common ones were in the Endless Cape. There was a tributary of the Blackwater that flowed close to the surface and the coast. Compared with the dangerous land route, sailing along the coast was obviously much safer. With the current technology of Neverwinter, it was undoubtedly the most suitable place to collect the Blackwater. It might take a long time for the news to spread in the southernmost region, and the clans who heard the news might not necessarily go to the southern territory immediately, but it was not a big problem. The oasis was almost irresistible to the Sand Nation. It did not matter if only one or two clans or hundreds of people were willing to go to the oasis at the beginning. With a pioneer, the others would sooner or later follow and become subjects under his rule. In this way, there were many advantages. In addition to obtaining a large number of laborers, the land would not be completely deserted, and the recovery of settlements could also prevent the spread of roving bandits. Roland did not need to transfer a large number of people from Neverwinter to work in the desert, and those who did not want to leave the southern territory could also find a place to live. Of course, there were also hidden dangers. That was the integration of the people of the kingdom and the Sand Nation of the Majin Kingdom. But Roland was not too worried about this. Not to mention that nationalism had not been awakened, the gods in this world were quite thought-provoking. They did not have a strong religious atmosphere, but were more like pure worship of nature. Both sides spoke the same language, and some of the customs of the Sand Nation were not so much a special culture as they had to change to adapt to the desert. Iron Axe and Echo were the best examples. The two wandered all the way to Border Town and did not seem to be out of place. Therefore, as long as the law was strictly enforced and the rewards and punishments were clear, Roland believed that the Sand Nation of the Majin Kingdom could also be transformed into qualified laborers. Even if there was a rebellion, the first army stationed in the Southern Territory and Fallen Dragon Ridge would not just sit there and watch. In fact, compared to the integration problem, Roland was more concerned about the legends that Iron Axe had mentioned and the hybrid demonic beast that had attacked the witches during the duel. If the former was not wrong, it sounded like an irresistible accident had led to the desertification of the southernmost region. Geographically speaking, this protruding corner of the continent was not too far from Grey Castle, so such a drastic change should not have happened. Unfortunately, he did not have enough people to explore the southernmost region, so he had to put this doubt aside. The behavior of the hybrid was even more inconceivable. Roland had already known that this kind of abnormal creature had a certain degree of intelligence, but why on earth did it take the risk to attack the witches? If the demonic beasts in the inland besieged the human cities under the influence of the relics of the gods, then the four-winged eagle obviously did not attack the witches alone for this reason. Just as Roland was pondering, Vendi and Phyllis knocked on the door and came in. "Your Majesty, the last batch of tequila facilities will soon arrive at the third border city. Pasha invites you to meet her in the underground world." Roland felt refreshed and thought, finally. The so-called third border city was an underground cave at the foot of the impassable mountain range. Its function was similar to that of an underground city. In essence, it was a huge hidden fortress. The last facilities were the instrument of divine retribution and the relics of the gods. In order to ensure their smooth arrival, the First Army in Neverwinter had also participated in the transportation. What about the demonic beasts? Any movements? There are no signs of large-scale gathering for the time being. Chapter 775. The entrance to the cave was located in the north of Neverwinter, at the junction of the city and the mountain range. Halfway up the mountain was the never-ending mine and furnace area. As they approached the foot of the mountain, a sturdy concrete wall appeared in front of them. There were sentry towers at the four corners of the wall, with barbed wire hanging from the top and two machine gun pillboxes at the entrance. Although some facilities were still under construction, this had become the most heavily guarded area in Neverwinter. Under the saluting gaze of the guards, Roland walked into the courtyard. Although it was only a wall, he suddenly had the illusion that he had traveled more than 1,000 years. The scene inside was definitely not something that could be seen in this era. It was a huge hole covered with concrete, more than 10 meters wide and more than 5 meters high. On both sides of the hole were two magnificent iron gates, which not only exceeded the size of the hole, but also reached an astonishing 1 meter thickness. Although it was not solid cast, but made up of several layers of steel plates, the total thickness of the armor was more than half a meter. It was completely a heavy partition door that could only be found in modern military fortresses. Due to the heavy weight of the iron gate, the hole had to be reinforced and a slide track was installed on the ground. Even so, it was impossible to move it by manpower alone. Therefore, there were also two steam engines on one side of the courtyard wall, one of which was responsible for providing power to open and close the gate. Once the demonic beasts broke through the defense line set by the Tequila witches, after the relics of the gods were withdrawn, this gate would block any demonic beasts that followed behind. In order to build it, Neverwinter had consumed almost 1/3 of the entire winter's steel output. The square shape did not seem to have any technical content, but the huge size of the project itself meant that it was very technical. Standing in front of the partition door that was as big as a building, Roland could feel the vigorous power contained in it. On the day when the gate was installed, he saw the scene of the iron gate opening and closing with his own eyes. The dull roar of the steam engine, the harsh friction of the wheels, and the huge object that was slowly approaching, almost seemed to be in charge of the entrance to the end of the world. There was a line of twisted words on both sides of the iron gate, which, when put together, meant the third border city. The group of people walked into the hole, and the light instantly dimmed. Phyllis took out the stone of lighting and walked to the front of the team, leading them into the underground cavern. "Your Majesty, I don't understand why you call this place the third border city." Vendi was puzzled. If the border area outside is the first city, then where is the second border city? "Because 3 is more appropriate," Roland replied. "Ah. Anyway, don't you think the number 3 matches the stronghold? Besides, the name isn't important, as long as people remember it." He spread his hands. "All right, if you like." Vendi curled her lips. After the conversation, there was only the echoing sound of footsteps and dripping water in the cave. Due to the lack of concrete spraying tools, only the ground of this passage had been hardened. On the left and right sides were drainage ditches and mine tracks. When it was necessary to transport materials and food, the steam engine installed in the cave would pull trailers to transport them. Roland had heard from Phyllis that some gods' punishment witches were interested in the strength of this machine. In the end, they found that even if 5 of them held a hemp rope together, they could not stop the steam engine from pulling them to the destination step by step. Since the walls and the top of the cave could not be covered with concrete, water seepage was inevitable. Fortunately, the temperature in the mountain was not too low, so the road would not freeze. Wherever the devouring worm crawled, it would also leave a trail of mucus. When it dried up, it would stick the soil together like a layer of paste, so they did not have to worry about the risk of the cave collapsing. After walking for about half an hour, the cave gradually became brighter. "We're almost there." Phyllis slowed down. "Your Majesty, do you need to?" Roland knew what she wanted to say. "It doesn't matter. Take me there now." The gods' punishment witches looked back at him deeply and said, "Yes, I understand." Walking out of the cave, their field of vision suddenly opened up. A spacious vaulted hall appeared in front of them. The area was about the size of a football field. Above their heads, they could see dozens of beams of light shining into the cave, reflecting light spots on the ground. With the help of the light well, even though it was deep in the mountains, it did not seem to be oppressive. There were not only witches guarding here, but also many soldiers of the First Army. Each of them had been examined by Nightingale and were the most loyal to Roland in the team. But even they were as far away from the hall as possible at this moment. In the center of the vast open space, there were only a few diamond-shaped magic cores and 3 senior Tequila witches, or rather, the original carriers. He smiled and walked toward the 3 witches, reaching out his right hand to the leading blob monster. We finally meet. You're Pasha, right? In an instant, Roland felt the breathing behind him quicken. A hand was already on his shoulder. If anything went wrong, Nightingale would undoubtedly pull him into the mist. The blob monster was silent for a moment, and then a familiar voice sounded in his mind. I'm surprised, Your Majesty. Before, when we talked with the illusory cores, the imaginary scenes were not so daunting. But now, the calmness you show at this moment is incredible. To be honest, you're the first person who has seen this body with his own eyes and can remain calm. Even the tequila witches were not as calm as you when they first saw the original carriers that had not been activated. I'm very curious. Aren't you afraid at all? She paused, then stretched out a tentacle and gently wrapped it around his palm. But you're right, I'm Pasha. Thank you for your support of the tequila witches. He hasn't supported us yet. Just sending a team of mortals to escort the relics is not a help or a surveillance. Another cold consciousness also came in. It's not too late to talk about this after exploring the snow mountain. Aletheia. We've made a deal before. A third voice interrupted him. Fine, I won't mention it. It seemed that the other two were Aletheia and Celine, who often appeared beside Pasha. Roland didn't mind her tone. Firstly, these ancient witches lived in an era where witches were revered, so it wouldn't be easy for them to change their mindset. Secondly, compared to their attitude on the surface, he was more interested in substantial gains. The most famous explorer in the fjords once said that fear comes from the unknown. No matter what you look like, your soul belongs to the tequila witches. Roland smiled. And I'm no stranger to the latter. Agatha has become an indispensable member of the Witch Union and is deeply trusted and loved by everyone. The tentacle felt quite rough, and its surface was not as dry as it looked. It was slightly moist, probably because it had been drilling in the soil. He could clearly feel the temperature under the skin. There was no doubt that the huge blob in front of him was a living creature. I see. Pasha sounded a little emotional. You're right. We've been working together for a long time. In the face of the threat of demons, everyone should put aside their prejudices and try to unite as much as possible. Roland said a few polite words and then got to the point. By the way, the relics of the gods should have been moved here, right? Can you show me what the thing that determines the fate of human beings looks like? Chapter 776. Roland curiously looked at the moving senior tequila witches. The tentacles on their bodies had a clear division of labor. The short ones twisted like snakes to provide support and walking power, the long ones were constantly inserted into the soil above their heads or under their feet to correct the direction. Some tentacles were obviously amazingly long. Judging from the height of the dome of the hall, they were probably more than 100 meters long, and they could shrink and contract freely like arms. To be able to support such a long tentacle, even the strongest muscles would not be able to do so. He guessed that the magic contained in the sarcomas gave them the power to move freely, just like those giant demonic beasts whose bodies were obviously beyond the limits of gravity. Bypassing the two magic cores and walking dozens of steps, Pasha stopped in front of a cube that seemed to be made of gemstones. That's a god's stone of retaliation. I can't get too close. Nightingale reminded him. Roland nodded calmly and asked Pasha, is the relic stored in this box? Yes, this is the only way to limit the range of its summoning. If there is no god's stone of retaliation around, I'm afraid that the residents in your city will be inadvertently affected by the relic. Pasha stretched out several tentacles and put them on the box of god's stones, but she did not immediately open it. Before touching it, I have to explain something to you in case of an accident. Is this thing dangerous? Vendi took a step forward and subconsciously stood in front of Roland. Don't worry too much, as long as you don't stay alone with the relic. Celine interrupted. What do you mean? Roland raised his eyebrows. As I said before, when you open your heart in front of the relic, you can see some incredible scenes. Whether you are a witch or a mortal, you can feel this kind of summoning. Pasha's tone became a lot more serious. But please remember, the scenes you see are not completely imaginary. Unlike the phantom instrument, the things in the picture can affect reality. This is the first point I want to make. Never accept the summoning of God alone at any time. The scenes in the picture can affect reality. Roland suddenly felt a little creeped out. Isn't this like Sadako climbing out of the TV? Why wouldn't it be dangerous with a few more people? Because once one was trapped in the divine realm, the body would show obvious reactions, such as sluggishness, ravings, and so on. At this time, the person next to you would need to drag you out of the range of influence of the relic. In the history books, there were many records of people who came into contact with relics alone, and their souls could not return to their bodies in the end. If 2 or 3 people took turns to touch the relics, this risk could be effectively reduced. I see. Roland glanced at the tequila witch. In other words, there are at least 5 people here, so there's almost no danger, right? If not, we wouldn't have dared to let you observe it up close. Celine nodded. As for the second point, let me explain it to you. Alethea's cold voice sounded. You should know that the huge picture scroll in the relic shows alien civilizations. If you have the chance to see them, they may. No, they will definitely try to hurt you. We can help you forcibly break free from the call, but we cannot help you resist your fear. She paused and said with a hint of sarcasm. Don't say I didn't warn you if you are scared and lose your composure. That's it. Roland was unmoved. Is there anything else you want to say? Alethea probably did not expect him to be so indifferent. She could not help but feel a little suffocated. If not, open it. Roland sighed in his heart. For modern people who had seen all kinds of monsters, aliens, thrillers, and horror movies, there was a huge difference in the degree of acceptance between people in the ancient times and people in the modern times. If he was unprepared, he might be scared out of his wits. However, Alethea's words, in a sense, were equivalent to a high-energy warning. As long as it did not cause real harm, he did not think he would give up exploring the mystery of the divine realm because of this degree of intimidation. I know. Pasha retracted her tentacles and opened the door of the god's stone box, revealing the spindle-shaped red crystal inside. After leaving the container, the relic floated naturally, like the magic cores, quietly suspended in the air about a meter above the ground. It can't leave the restricted area of the god's stone, so you need to get close to it, relax your mind, and then you can go to the divine realm. Your Majesty. Vendi grabbed Roland's hand worriedly. Don't worry, with you watching, nothing will happen. He patted the back of the red-haired witch's hand comfortingly. I know what I'm going to face. Not all of the information he obtained came from the tequila witches. Whether it was Isabella's memories or his investigation of the pivotal secret temple of the church in the dream world, he could confirm that there was indeed such a thing that could bring people into the incredible, divine realm. Roland walked to the relic, sat cross-legged, and closed his eyes. At the same time, Pasha also stretched out her tentacles and connected with the other 2 companions. Their consciousness quickly flowed between the 3 of them, mapping what they wanted to say to each other in their minds. How could he be so arrogant? I really want to see him tremble in fear and pee in his pants. Otherwise, he would never realize what a terrible enemy he was about to face, Alethea said indignantly. Let's see what he has to say when he is so scared that he pees himself on the spot. What good would that do us? Celine glared at her angrily. Mortals care a lot about their dignity and prestige. If we make him lose face, I'm afraid he will hate us too. If we lose his support, how can we explore the snow mountain and find the chosen one? What's worse, if he becomes afraid of the demon, the world will be over. He is not afraid of anything. Anyway, I have already reminded him, can you still stop him? Bringing him to the relic is a mistake, Celine muttered. I didn't suggest this from the beginning, at least not until both sides have a basic trust. And then hide it from him. Or stop him from getting close to the relic. That way, we will never get his trust. Pasha sighed softly and put herself in his shoes. Would you trust an ally who did not even want you to get close to the key thing that determined the fate of mankind? No matter how nice you said it, the other party would not appreciate it. Therefore, some things must wait for him to experience personally to understand our sincerity. But don't worry too much, the demon and the giant I will not appear every time. Pasha seemed to be comforting Celine, but also comforting herself. Even if he is frightened and loses his composure, as long as we promise to keep our mouths shut and let this scene never be known to the world, he should be able to understand our difficulties. What about the 2 witches he brought with him? Will they also keep this a secret? Aletheia asked maliciously. There was no doubt that in her opinion, it was quite a pleasant thing to make a mortal lose face in front of a witch. That's not something we can control. Chapter 777. The Starry Sky Dome, the Bloody Moon, the Huge Painting. Just as Pasha had described. No matter what it was, it gave people a feeling that it was incomparably grand. Only when one was in it could one truly feel its vastness. It was no wonder that they called this place the realm of gods. Is this the teleportation spell? Or the sea of consciousness? Roland squatted down and gently touched the floor. It looked like it was made of polished stone, but its surface was as smooth as a mirror. His fingertips accurately felt the cold and hard touch, as if what he saw was not a fantasy, but a real thing. However, after experiencing the dream world that was so realistic that it was exaggerated, such a scene could no longer scare him. Roland looked up at the dome. The huge crimson moon was like a round pancake covering the giant painting. If he looked closely, he could even see the surging lines on its surface. If he had to use a word to describe it, it would be the sea. It was not as dazzling as the sun. Although it was red all over, it did not seem to be glowing or heating up. The red ripples were like waves or whirlpools, densely covering his entire field of vision. The only problem was that this circle was a bit too round. It was not like a sphere at all, but a large flat circle. Perhaps the bloody moon was too close to him. Roland carefully looked at it for a while, but he could not connect it with the red flying star observed by astrologers. It was neither like a planet nor a star. If the battle of divine will was really caused by it, how could it come to the world? Suddenly, an idea came to his mind. If the chief astrologer of Dispersion's star was summoned by the relic, could he confirm that this thing was indeed the bloody moon from the faintly shining stars on the dome? Of course, it was more likely that the poor old man was scared to death. Roland shrugged, stood up, and looked around at the 4 huge paintings surrounding the bloody moon. The throne, the sea, the black screen, and himself. Except for the scene in the underground hall of the Third Border City, these records were all read in the library of the pivotal secret temple. There was nothing special about them. The relic was probably like a recorder that could feed back the scene around it in real time. According to Pasha, the completely black painting belonged to the eliminated underground civilization. Roland called out to himself and Vendi in the painting, but the latter two did not respond. Obviously, they could not hear him. What happened to influencing reality? He walked closer to the throne scroll and reached out to touch the scroll itself. It felt like a soft and smooth cloth. The texture was very fine, and the image on it was just an image. He could not cross the border and enter the world of the painting. Roland didn't find anything new after walking around. He was about to head out of the palace to see if this place was really boundless when the scroll behind him suddenly made a noise. In this quiet environment, the sound was exceptionally clear, like the friction between steel, or the echo of a hard object hitting the ground. In that instant, he felt all the hair on his body stand on end. Damn it, no one mentioned that these giant paintings could make sounds. He stopped and turned around abruptly. A pitch-black armored warrior had appeared in the painting of the throne. It was sitting on the throne, and a pair of scarlet eyes were looking down at him. Meanwhile, the other painting also started to move. A large number of bubbles surged up with a muffled sound, and then a huge eyeball stretched out from the dark bottom of the sea and approached the edge of the painting, as if it wanted to poke out of the frame. 3 triangular eyes stared at him at the same time, which made him a little uncomfortable at first glance. Did you make an appointment? Roland couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. As long as they didn't hide and play tricks, he was not afraid of these two monsters who didn't look scary at all. They were just senior demons and the guardians of the relics of an unknown civilization. He raised his head and walked to the center of the 4 giant paintings, looking at the 2 alien creatures. Good afternoon. Are you also here to participate in the battle of divine will? Do we have to fight this life and death war? Can't we just sit down and talk? Can you understand what I'm saying? Even if you don't understand, you should squeak. Hey, is this a game to test your willpower? Whoever closes their eyes first loses. Roland tried to communicate with them, but he didn't get any response. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but he seemed to feel that the demon's chest was rising and falling more rapidly, and the huge eyeball was gradually trembling. Was this the side effect of staring at him? Could it be that they could only stare at him and see whose eyes would ache first? How could this be considered dangerous? Even if he came here alone, it wouldn't be a problem. He rolled his eyes and was about to stop this boring staring contest when a group of black tentacles suddenly appeared in the painting. Like snakes, they pounced on the demon and the eyeball and tied them up tightly. What the hell is this? Roland couldn't help but be stunned. The demon finally moved. It grabbed the throne tightly and let out a series of strange sounds. Flames and transparent sharp blades suddenly appeared around it, fighting with the tentacles. However, the number of tentacles was astonishing, and the seemingly soft little hand at the end could easily break the weapon summoned by the opponent. The demon seemed to be fighting with an invisible strong enemy, and its screams became more and more intense. Even Roland could feel the tension in its tone. As a bolt of lightning burst out from the armor, the tentacles finally stepped back and loosened their grip on the demon. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the demon staggered up from the seat and ran out of the scope of the huge painting without looking back. In its panic, it even broke a part of the armrest of the throne. The giant eye was not any better. Several tentacles had already pierced into its eyeball, and just looking at it was painful. Light blue liquid trickled out of the pierced part, as if it was crying. Instead of making strange sounds like the demon, the giant eye constantly shot out dazzling light from its 3 pupils, blocking most of the tentacles. Suddenly, all the pupils of the giant eye opened at the same time, and a looming wave suddenly rushed towards the huge painting. Roland suddenly felt a stinky smell on his face, and he couldn't help but take a few steps back. The tentacles also loosened their entanglement on the eyeball, and the eyeball quickly slid back to where it came from, disappearing into the darkness in the blink of an eye. At the same time, the blue waves of the sea above his head were rapidly darkening, and it seemed that the view was sinking. After a while, he couldn't see any light at all. That's it. Chapter 778. 15 minutes have passed. Celine breathed a sigh of relief. It seems that he didn't encounter anything. What a pity. He's lucky. Alethea said with flagging interest. I don't want to pin the result on probability at all, she complained. Please choose a more secure method next time, okay? Let's not talk about what happened. Alethea changed the subject. Guess how long a mortal king can stay in there? In the records left by mortals in the Land of Dawn, the longest time was less than a quarter of an hour, right? Witches are no better. The time they can stay in the Divine Land has nothing to do with magic power. Even the Union has a group of mortals who take turns to monitor the relics. But considering the age and experience of the king, he should come out soon. According to all the records Celine had read, warriors who had personally experienced the battlefield and fought with demons would generally stay longer, regardless of whether they were witches or mortals. The highest record was set by Lady Alice, who lasted for almost 2 hours. As a king who was behind the scenes, it was already very good to have such a performance. Maybe he will want to stay longer. After all, it is the first time he has seen such a magical place. Then he will feel dizzy or even pass out. Celine suddenly realized something and looked at Pasha. Did you forget to tell him about this? Passing out is not a loss of composure, and it won't cause any real harm. Pasha waved her tentacles. On the contrary, this uncomfortable experience of spiritual exhaustion can reduce his impulse to touch the relics of the gods, which is a good thing for everyone. So, you didn't forget? Pasha did not deny. Some things are better left unsaid. If it were us, we wouldn't want to be restricted too much when exploring the divine land, right? Now I understand why Lady Natalia chose you to be one of the 3 seats candidates. Alethea smacked her lips. Celine could not help but have the same feeling. Compared to being frightened to the point of losing his composure, fainting out of spiritual exhaustion could be seen as an exit without side effects. It could reduce the curiosity of mortals and not destroy the relationship between them. Obviously, Pasha thought more deeply than either of them. But after waiting for a while, she frowned slightly. It has been more than a quarter of an hour. Is he okay? Pasha glanced at Roland Wimbledon, who was still sitting upright, and said, "It looks like, there's nothing unusual." Sure enough, this mortal king was full of surprises. A new record has been set. Should I say congratulations? Alethea shrugged her mane beard. Celine did not answer. She felt a little uneasy and felt that something was wrong. What happened next seemed to verify her guess. After another quarter of an hour, Roland was still motionless. She felt more and more anxious. Towards the flow of time, a person who had lived for more than 100 years should feel extremely vague, but this body's almost constant heartbeat could accurately tell her the changes of every moment and every breath. 3/4 of an hour of exploration was a little too long no matter how one looked at it. The other party was not an extraordinaire, nor was he a warrior. He should have exhausted all his energy a long time ago. Could it be? There was an accident in the god realm that he had never noticed before. Vendi couldn't help but step forward as if she wanted to wake the king up, but Pasha stopped her. If you get too close to the relic, you will also be affected by it. Then let me enter the god realm and bring his majesty back. She insisted. Even if you go in, you can't bring the king back. No matter how many people are inspired by it at the same time, the god realm they see is unique. Celine noticed that the other witch, who had been hiding, also moved. Judging from the vague magic reaction, the witch took out something from her bosom. According to the information Phyllis had gathered, it should be a unique weapon of Neverwinter. After conveying her concern to the other 2 witches, Pasha nodded and immediately took action. She stretched out her tentacles to entangle the mortal king and pulled him back to Vendi. Although it was not ideal to end the exploration in this way, nothing was more important than Roland's safety. If there was a conflict between the 2 sides, the consequences would be unimaginable. As the relic was put back into the god's stone box, Roland suddenly opened his eyes. "Your Majesty, are you okay?" Vendi helped him to stand up and asked anxiously. "I'm fine. I'm fine." He rubbed his sore legs. "I saw the foreign monsters guarding the other 2 relics and talked to them. Unfortunately, they couldn't understand me." What did you say?" Celine was shocked. Did you meet the demons and a huge eyeball? It seemed to be in a ship that could sail underwater." Roland said. "Of course, I'm not sure whether it was a ship or something else." Even though Celine couldn't see her companion's expression, she could feel the shock of the other 2 witches, especially Alethea. Among the survivors, Alethea stayed in the illusion for the longest time. As a member of the Blessed Army, Alethea could stay in the illusion for about an hour, but that was only when there was nothing in the scroll. If she encountered demons or enemies of another race, her energy consumption would be doubled. Then, what happened? Pasha continued to ask. "I don't know. Anyway, some black tentacles suddenly appeared in the scroll and attacked them." Roland briefly described the situation. Those tentacles were very difficult to deal with, so they had to withdraw from the scroll. The whole process took only a few minutes, no, about 3/4 of an hour. Did he mean that he encountered the guardians of the other 2 civilizations at the same time, and not only was he unharmed, but he also forced them to retreat? Celine felt as if she was listening to a fairy tale. She was not surprised by the appearance of the black tentacles. As the energy consumption continued to decline, the influence of the relics on the explorers would increase. Auditory hallucinations, tentacles, or something else, would appear one by one. They were not simple mental disturbances, but they would cause real damage to the body, which was why Pasha emphasized that they were not illusory. Before these influences caused real damage, as long as the summoning was stopped, the explorers would be fine. Of course, if one wanted to forcefully resist this kind of spiritual erosion, it was not something that ordinary people could do. Even a witch who had experienced hundreds of battles would quickly feel tired and eventually lose control of her body. But why was the situation completely reversed for Roland, and even the black tentacles were rushing toward the enemy? This was the first time she heard of such a thing. Celine suddenly had an inconceivable thought as she looked at the king, who seemed to be disapproving of her actions. Could it be that the mental strength of this ordinary person was on par with the head of the three chiefs, Alice, the queen of Starfall City? However, the king obviously did not feel this way. He stretched his limbs and smiled. But thank you for pulling me out. I wanted to see if there was a boundary to that place, but it turned out to be too far. I really don't want to go back the way I came. Ahem, is that so? The three of them were speechless for a while. Pasha broke the silence. So do you want to continue exploring the relics? Yes. Chapter 779. He had always been interested in the central carrier that was mentioned in the previous meeting. It had fused with the souls of numerous witches and sacrificed its consciousness in exchange for the ability to decipher the documents left behind by the underground civilization. Furthermore, it could only answer yes or no. Other than that, it was no different from an inanimate object. All of this gave it a mysterious and tragic aura. However, when Roland saw the central carrier imprisoned in the secret underground chamber of the hall, he could not help but gasp. A sarcoma much larger than Pasha and the others was bound by layers of chains. A few of its thick tentacles were even pulled apart and nailed into the walls or ceiling. Its damaged skin was riddled with scars and many of its tentacles were broken. It was obvious that this was not the first time it had been treated in such a manner. If he remembered correctly, the central carrier was like the original carrier and had sentience. It could feel cold, heat, sweetness, bitterness, and pain. Why? Roland could not help but frown. Aren't the souls fused with witches? And one of your three chiefs, Lady Eleanor, your majesty, Pasha sighed. There is no other choice. The carrier's power is not much lower than Scourge's. Our tentacles can drill through the soil and dig a light well above the dome. Naturally, we can attack our enemies and tear our prey in half. If we do not do this, an unconscious carrier that can move freely would probably cause more trouble than a hybrid demonic beast. So that's why. Roland immediately understood her helplessness. The tentacle sarcoma was probably the basic combat unit of the underground civilization. Once an unconscious carrier within the base lost control, it would pose a great threat to the relics of the gods and the magic power core. The survivors of Tequila were obviously unable to accept such a risk and had no other choice but to imprison it. Unfortunately, even though he knew, he still sighed in his heart. After all, the witches who had willingly fused with Tequila had given up everything, but now they could only be trapped in this dark corner, unable to move. We've tried to ask them how they feel, but we never got an answer. The fused souls can no longer be extracted through the magic core, so we don't know if they feel the stimulation from the outside world. Roland thought. But we didn't get an answer. The fused souls can't be extracted through the magic core, so we don't know if they feel the stimulation from the outside world. Becoming one with Lady Eleanor is the ultimate goal of every Tequila witch. We are no exception, so you don't have to worry about it. Alethea, who had been silent all this while, spoke again. However, Roland didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the other party's voice wasn't as cold as before. It should have leveled up from ice to ice water. However, when we asked if we wanted to imprison the central carrier, the three main tentacles all answered yes. Celine added, otherwise, we wouldn't have fixed her so thoroughly. Roland nodded. There's a painter named Soroya in the Witch Union who can draw extremely flexible fabrics. There's also a little girl named Soft Feathers who can make objects sticky. If the two abilities were used together, they would be able to produce an even stronger binding force than the iron chains. Using this method to tie her up, at least she wouldn't be covered in injuries. If you don't have any objections. No, it would be great if that's the case. The mane beard on Pasha's head drooped slightly. Please accept my gratitude. It doesn't matter. It's just a piece of cake. Roland waved his hand. But, what does it mean when all three main tentacles say yes? Is it possible that one of them says yes and the other says no? Then who should we listen to? Let Celine explain this question for you. It's like this. Celine was quite excited to be able to help reduce the pain of her fused companions. She immediately said, the biggest difference between the central carrier and us is that she has three main tentacles. She can transmit more complicated messages without using conscious communication, just like I am now. As soon as she finished speaking, the main tentacle on her head emitted a faint red light. Oh. This can also emit light? Before we completely mastered conscious communication, we often used it to express our feelings and emotions, but we didn't use it much after that. Celine moved to the center of the secret chamber and pointed to the three main tentacles of the central carrier that were firmly nailed to the ground. But they can't do that because they have lost their consciousness. They can only answer through the red light. If it's bright, it means yes. If it's not, it means no. However, when we were deciphering the documents of the underground civilization, we realized that a simple yes or no could not help us find the correct answer quickly. She continued to explain, for example, a sentence that means I am a tequila witch, if translated to I am a witch or I am a tequila witch, it will be displayed as no. As such, even a simple sentence will require a lot of time to confirm. So you used three answers to express the degree of closeness? Roland immediately understood their thoughts. Your comprehension ability is indeed extraordinary, Celine praised. That's right. The closer you are to the real answer, the more red light will light up. When all three main tentacles light up, it is equivalent to being completely correct. Of course, it also means special recognition. So, with Eleanor as the leader, the fused souls did not reject their companions from imprisoning them underground? Roland could not help but be moved. Although he did not know if they made the judgment based on the safety of the base, or if they answered based on their own feelings, this decision made him sigh with emotion. He took a deep breath. Can I ask her some questions? Of course. Celine moved away. Just ask the question directly. Of course. Roland walked in front of the central carrier and said slowly, suppose I have 2 baskets with 2 apples in each. After pouring them out, there will be 4 apples on the ground, right? The 3 tentacles instantly lit up. Is that what you wanted to ask? Celine asked in surprise. Your Majesty, Vendi also felt a little awkward. What did you think of? Just a test. Roland asked again without changing his expression, then I have 12,345 baskets with 54,321 apples in each. If I pour them all out, how many apples will there be on the ground? He took out a small piece of paper from his pocket. I guess it will be, right? That was the answer he had prepared in advance. The result was a 9-digit number, which was considered a complicated calculation in this era. Those who had not received mathematics education in Neverwinter would not be able to come up with the answer in a short time. This could be seen from the silence of the senior tequila witches. Chapter 780. She really can figure it out. Regardless of whether the central carrier used the additive method or the linear multiplication method, the fact that she could get the answer in an instant showed that her calculation ability was far superior to that of an ordinary person. Even if she could only answer yes or no, it would still be of great help to the Arithmetic Academy. At least she could use it to verify the result and reduce the error rate of large-scale complex calculations. Roland squatted down happily and patted the main tentacle. "You're amazing." The red light went out. "Your Majesty, she can't communicate with you," Pasha reminded him. "She can understand what I say and answer yes or no. This is already a kind of communication." The essence of communication was receiving and giving back. At most, she could only say that she was limited by the output and could not talk like a normal person. Roland waved his hand carelessly. Maybe it was time to try to see if she could really only give a yes or no expression. Think of one glowing tentacle as 1, 2 as 2, and so on. Can you use the red light to represent 3? Roland thought for a while and asked. This question was much simpler than the multiplication of 5-digit numbers, but the meaning behind it was very different. If she answered yes, it meant that she could use more complex expressions to expand the feedback content. With her super calculation ability, she might even be able to display the result directly. However, the central carrier did not give an immediate answer like before. After a few seconds, one of the tentacles glowed red, another glowed faintly, and the last one remained silent. According to Celine, one glowing, one weak, and one extinguished meant that the answer was 30% correct. Unfortunately, the answer did not last long. The glimmering one was quickly extinguished, and even the tentacle that glowed red at first also dimmed after a while. Now, the answer was no. Your question is beyond her ability, Celine sighed. If she answers yes, it means that she needs to give an answer beyond yes or no, which will aggravate the confusion in her mind. She paused and then continued, in fact, we've tried to let the central carrier express simple meanings or even short sentences. But once it exceeds a simple judgment of right or wrong, her response speed will be greatly reduced, and she will easily fall into confusion like now. In other words, is there a logical obstacle? Roland frowned and said, is it okay for her to be like this? She'll recover after some rest. Celine waved her tentacles. At that time, I asked her some contradictory questions. As a result, she ignored us for half a month. It seemed that the biological computer was not that easy to learn, he thought to himself. Since the central carrier could determine the result of the calculation, it meant that she knew the answer. The key was how to display the answer in its original form. Perhaps he had to find a way to answer with yes and no, but also to express it in a complex way. Only then would he be able to achieve this. However, this idea was beyond the scope of his knowledge. Coding and engineering were hostile to each other, and there was almost no overlap in their professional content. After thinking about it for a while, Roland gave up on the idea of doing research on his own. By the way, I remember you said that the carrier needs soil and heat to maintain its vitality. Is there magma here too? Fren hasn't dug that deep yet, but we've found a boiling river. There should be a lava zone nearby. In addition, there is a smell of sulfur in the river, and it feels good to soak in it. If you want to ask about the central carrier, we draw a lot of hot water to give her a bath every few days, so you don't have to worry about this. In other words, magma was not a necessity, and hot water could make do with it. This was undoubtedly good news. If he wanted to lure her to the Computation Academy, he only needed to provide a boiler to boil water to meet her daily needs. Of course, it was far from the time to mention this matter. The Tequila Witches had just moved and had not officially joined the United Front. At this time, it would undoubtedly be difficult to ask for her. Moreover, when those astrologers saw such a huge tentacle monster, they might not be able to maintain their sage demeanor in the past. Everything had to wait until the exploration of the Snow Mountain was completed and both sides had established basic trust. After leaving the secret chamber, the tour of the Third Border City came to an end. At present, the outline of this underground city had been excavated, and at best, it was just an underground residence. When all the passages connecting the impassable mountain peaks were opened, it would be like a real hidden stronghold, connected with the turrets and camps on the ground as a whole, becoming a part of the impassable mountain defense line. When Roland returned to the castle, he immediately summoned the directors of the major departments in the city hall to the reception hall. Then, as everyone gasped, a purple light curtain slowly opened and enveloped the entire hall. Even though they had been warned in advance, when this unimaginable illusion really appeared in front of everyone, all the managers' expressions changed drastically. The younger Minister of Agriculture, Sirius Daly, even accidentally knocked over the teacup on the table. Berev kept wiping the sweat from his forehead, while Kyle Sichi and Astrologer of Dispersion Star widened their eyes. If it were not for the fact that His Majesty was still sitting in the main seat, they would have fled. The only one who could still be considered calm was Edith. Although this woman from an aristocratic family in the northern region had also shrunk back, her eyes were still mixed with excitement and curiosity. Moreover, Roland unexpectedly noticed that there was a trace of reverence in her eyes when she looked at him. Well, he had to admit that women's thoughts were really hard to understand. Except for Edith, the reactions of the others were basically within Roland's expectations. However, since they wanted to form a united front against the demons, it was impossible to keep the existence of the tequila survivors a secret forever. They would show up on the stage sooner or later. Rather than asking the city hall about the strange phenomenon at the foot of the mountain in the north of the border area, it would be better for him to introduce the ancient witches to everyone first. After more than 2 years of training, this group of people should have seen a lot of things, and their ability to accept new things had also greatly improved. However, after Roland finished explaining the origin and purpose of the tentacle sarcoma, as well as the cooperation plan to explore the snow mountain, most of the managers showed considerable resistance. If it were not for the fact that the ancient witches had some relations with the Witch Union, they would probably have regarded them as alien creatures like the demons. Director Berev said that the finance department had now entered the year-end final settlement stage, so it was not convenient to make new logistical plans. Moreover, the months of demons had not yet ended, and a team had already been sent to the southernmost region. If they sent more troops to the snow mountain, it might lead to a shortage of defense forces in the border area. Chief Knight Carter frankly said that the joint operation was not safe, and that the danger might come from within. His distrust was obvious. Sirius, the Minister of Agriculture, stammered that the food reserves might be tight because of the troop deployment plan, and if the news spread, it would easily cause panic among the residents. Carr, the Minister of Construction, was worried that if the ancient witches were allowed to hollow out the mountain, it would cause instability in the upper mining area and lead to collapse. In short, there were all kinds of strange reasons, but the main idea was basically the same: Your Majesty, please think twice. The discussion reached an impasse for a while. If this was a parliamentary discussion, it was obvious that it would be difficult to carry out the cooperation plan. However, Roland did not forget that he was the final arbiter, the Lord of Neverwinter, and also the King of Greycastle. At this time, it was time for him to forcefully implement the plan. Chapter 781. Roland knocked on the table, and the hall instantly fell silent. After the months of demons, next year will be the most important year for Greycastle. He stood up from the main seat and walked to the back of the crowd. I'll unify the whole territory, hold an enthronement ceremony, and become the rightful king of Greycastle. And all of you will be my first batch of ministers, assisting me in governing this country. If it had been 2 years ago, these lofty words would have been regarded as the arrogant words of Prince Roland, who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. If it had been a year ago, it would have been a distant goal to strive for. But today, no one doubted Roland's words. The crowd stood up, put their right hands on their chests, and bowed their heads to him. It's my honor, Your Majesty. Their grumbles and wariness disappeared in an instant, and a hint of excitement appeared on their faces. The longer they stayed in the city hall, the more they understood the power of Neverwinter. There was no doubt that as long as he made this decision, it would be indisputable that the whole territory of Greycastle would be under his rule. And they could also follow His Majesty and become the most powerful group of people in the kingdom. Roland pressed his palms together and motioned for everyone to sit down. Not only that, the territory of Greycastle will become unprecedentedly vast. The barbarian land in the west, the Fjord Islands in the east, the Endless Cape in the south, and the Hermes Plateau in the north will all be under my command. To achieve this, The First Army will undoubtedly be the busiest department next year, and Neverwinter can only leave a small number of garrison guards. Therefore, exploring the Great Snow Mountain is a necessary measure to eliminate hidden dangers. I don't want our backyard to be on fire and King's City to be attacked by unknown enemies. Your Majesty, perhaps we can rely on the First Army and the Witch Union to enter the Snow Mountain. Carter suggested in a low voice. In a cave with no light and an extremely complex terrain, guns and cannons can only play a limited role, Roland interrupted him. There are neither preset locations to attack nor a reference map. If we encounter hybrids, how many casualties do you think the First Army will have to pay to repel those monsters? The Chief Knight was silent for a moment. This is the reason why we have to cooperate in this exploration. The gods' punishment witches of Tequila and the Witch Union can complement each other. The First Army will be responsible for bringing up the rear and setting up sentry posts at the explored entrances to ensure the smooth retreat route. This is the safest way. Roland paused and suddenly raised his voice. Listen up, all of you. Don't tell me how difficult it is to implement this plan. You are sitting here to solve the problem. If you can't do it, City Hall doesn't need someone who can't meet my requirements. At this point, he looked at the City Hall manager. Bear of Mons. Yes, Your Majesty. The latter shuddered. Are there any problems with the final accounting and logistics? I think, that's all. The old director wiped the sweat off his face. I'll come up with a plan in 5 days. 3 days, Roland said in an unquestionable tone. He then shifted his gaze to the Minister of Agriculture. Serious Dolly. Here. If you don't have enough food in stock, transfer some from the Longsong area. We have plenty of cement boats. Do you understand? Yes, Your Majesty. Car Van Bate. Your Majesty, I'll carefully check the stability of the mine and the furnace group to ensure that there will be no collapse, the Minister of Construction hurriedly said. Very good. Roland smiled. Next. This time, all the problems were easily solved. When the ministers realized that Roland had made up his mind, they quickly assigned the tasks. No one dared to delay any further. After deciding who would be in charge, the next step was to determine the team to set off. As Pasha's voice sounded directly in their heads, everyone panicked again. Fortunately, the scene of Roland talking to the tentacle monster calmly comforted the ministers, and they did not make the embarrassing move of jumping out of the window and running away. Perhaps they felt that they had already promised His Majesty, so they just closed their eyes and listened. The ministers lowered their heads and pretended to be in deep thought, but in fact, they were avoiding eye contact with the tentacle monster. It was as if the voice was not an ordinary conversation, but the language of hell that could steal people's minds. Roland did not know whether to laugh or cry at this situation. Edith, who was the only one looking at the light screen, became the most eye-catching person in the crowd. Sometimes, she even tried to talk to the senior tequila witches like Roland did. Barav also raised his head several times, as if he did not want his opponent to steal the limelight, but he could not say a word in the end. Fortunately, Roland had already planned in this regard and did not need too much involvement from City Hall. In the end, Tequila agreed to send 50 Gods Punishment Witches to fight side by side with the main fighters of the Witch Union. The First Army, under the command of Brian, would send 500 people to participate in this operation. The rest of the troops stationed in Neverwinter would be temporarily taken over by Carter, who would continue to guard against sporadic demonic beasts harassing the border. After reaching an agreement on the exploration plan, Roland was about to end the bilateral meeting when Edith suddenly raised her hand. Your Majesty, I apply to join the Snow Mountain exploration team and go to the Great Snow Mountain of the Western region with the First Army. Barav twitched the corner of his mouth. You're neither a witch nor a soldier of the army. Don't make trouble for His Majesty. I once served as a swordsmanship instructor in the Night Battalion. It's difficult for an average person to last more than 5 rounds in my hands, and demonic beasts are no exception. I am fully capable of protecting myself. She remained unmoved. Roland asked curiously, what's the reason for your application? The battle of divine will is getting closer and closer, but few of the ministers here can tell what the demons look like and what the underground races look like. How can I help you manage the city hall if I don't even know the enemy? Some people may think that it's the First Army's business and that the department I'm in charge of has nothing to do with the battle of divine will. But the fact is, when the war starts, both the Ministry of Construction and the Ministry of Agriculture will be involved and serve the war. Therefore, only by knowing the characteristics of the enemy and who I'm fighting against can I better share the workload for you, Edith said with fervor and assurance. You. The old director wanted to refute but did not know where to start. Roland could not help but raise the corner of his mouth. This was an interesting way of putting it. Although it was a bit unreasonable, it suddenly made him have an idea. If he could turn her way of doing things into a tacit rule, that if he wanted to go further on the road of power, he must be transferred to the front line or a war-torn city to gain the qualification for promotion, it might be a good idea. In this way, at least the officials in the city hall would not belittle the battle of destiny, nor would they issue some outrageous and unrealistic decrees. In addition, Edith did have the ability to fight, so there was no harm in letting her follow the First Army. Thinking of this, he nodded to the Pearl of the Northern region. Then, get ready to go. Chapter 782. Sister, are you going on a long trip? Cole Kant's voice came from behind. Edith continued to tidy up the clothes in her hands and said without looking back, it's not far. I'll just wander around the western region. How long will it take? The younger brother walked up to her. I don't know. You didn't pick out a gown or a corset. You didn't even bring your favorite bra. Cole looked at the pile of clothes on the bed. Aren't you going to visit the nobles and attend a banquet? Your observation skills have improved, but there are some things you don't have to say. Edith glanced sideways at him. The latter immediately flinched and said, You taught me that. Then I'll teach you one more thing. When facing a lady, you must always be elegant and think carefully about your words. Do you understand? But you're my sister. If it wasn't for that, you would have already suffered. Cole shuddered and said, I understand. Good. Edith shrugged and said, How does it feel to work in City Hall? It's okay. I did as you said and didn't reveal my noble identity. I just wrote and recorded. It's not difficult. But I don't understand. The younger brother hesitated and said, Why don't you put me in your department? After watching the artillery drill, Cole Kant finally gave up the idea of returning to the city of Evernight. They moved from the Foreign Affairs building to a spacious house near the castle and became official residents of Neverwinter. As a noble who had received a traditional education, it was not difficult for her to find a clerical job in the city hall. In addition to the nearly 100 scholars and attendants that her father had transferred from the northern region, she now had her own staff in the city hall. Although these people would not stay here forever, His Majesty would never refuse the knowledgeable people from the northern region who were constantly sent here to learn the new system. She knew how much the young king craved talents. Currently, only the northern region was willing to provide him with managers. As long as there were replacements, she could always have a foothold in His Majesty's new regime. Because it's not necessary, and it's easy to make mistakes. Edith smiled slightly. The director usually keeps an eye on me. If I transfer you here and he finds something wrong with you, whether I help or not, I'll be in a passive position. And if the Kant family's honor is damaged, it will affect His Majesty's opinion of me. She paused. No matter how distant our relationship is, to outsiders, we're still a whole. So no matter what you do in the future, you must understand that you don't just represent yourself. Cole lowered his head, a pensive expression on his face. Edith did not know how much he could understand, but she could not help him understand this kind of thing. Even if the feudal nobles no longer existed in the new regime, the influence of bloodlines and surnames would still last for a long time, and in the short term, they would even attract more attention than before. Just like after the sun sets, the moon becomes the brightest celestial body. After a while, he nodded. I'll be careful. Her father's evaluation of his second son was that he was timid, indecisive, not good at fighting, and not suitable to lead the family. Especially the first point, in the era when the lord had to lead the knight to defend his home or go out to plunder, a timid way of doing things would easily cause dissatisfaction among his subordinates. Edith knew there was one more point that her father did not mention. That was, Cole Kant was like her. If Timothy had not broken the order of the northern region and been eager to support the weak nobles as allies, the Kant family would probably still be in a corner of the northern region and would not be where it was today. That was why her father had such high hopes for her. But for Neverwinter, these shortcomings became insignificant. On the contrary, to a certain extent, they became advantages, such as being cautious, not showing off, and learning fast, all of which were suitable for working in City Hall. From the moment a group of civilians with snow powder weapons took only one day to conquer King's City, individual strength and courage were no longer important. This was also the reason why she insisted on leaving her brother in Neverwinter from the beginning. By the way, sister. Cole casually picked up a long dress and compared it with his body. Where are you going? I don't want to stay alone in such a big house. It's boring. You were the one who asked me to buy a big house. 500 gold royals is not a small amount even for me, but now you think it's too much? Edith asked coldly. No. I'm satisfied. Cole was so scared that he almost dropped the dress. Next summer, my third brother will also come to Neverwinter. Then you'll have company. She looked at him and was surprised to find that the dress covering Cole's chest matched him very well. She could not help but have an interesting idea. As for where I'm going, it's a secret of Neverwinter. It's not that I can't tell you, but according to the old rules, you have to pay a certain price. Cole hesitated for a moment. He was no stranger to this little game of exchanging rewards for information and had been teased many times. But in the end, his curiosity still overwhelmed the trace of fear in his heart. I want to hear it. Edith raised the corner of her mouth. The great snow mountain of the western region will act together with the First Army. He asked in surprise, you mean the source of the Redwater River? What's there? Unknown hybrid monsters or alien enemies. Anyway, it's not surprising to encounter anything. She briefly told him about the information provided by the tequila survivors during the meeting. And we have a group of tentacles as allies. Monsters against monsters, it's really exciting. Wait. Cole opened his mouth and stammered, aren't you afraid at all? His Majesty is actually dealing with monsters. Even if it's a demon, it won't look like what you said. So. Edith spread out her hands carelessly. Isn't this a good thing? A good thing? Cole could not believe his ears. Sister, are you all right? No, I mean, she sighed. Do you still remember why we pledged our allegiance to His Majesty? Because of a higher power. Cole replied cautiously. Not exactly, but not wrong either. Edith looked at him with burning eyes. Power comes from the vast land and people. If even the ancients, alien races, and even the demons are on His Majesty's side, doesn't it mean that the power we can share extends beyond the human territory? Cole sucked in a breath of cold air, clearly stunned by this statement. A small noble who manages a village can call out the name of every squire, but it's difficult for a lord of a town to do so. The more complicated the residents of a territory are, the broader the territory is. As for a king who has brought alien races under his rule, there has never been such a case. Since the reason why we left the northern region in the first place was that the Duke's land was too small, why should we worry about this now? Cole stood there for a long time before he came to his senses. But they're different from us, aren't they? Edith curled her lips. As long as His Majesty is the leader, he can do whatever he wants. Cole felt a chill in the heated room. Chapter 783. It was a long dream. A dream that Lorgar knew was a dream. The moment the four-winged eagle fell to the ground, her body had already deeply remembered the reaction and pain of that moment. Her legs were crushed, and her bones were like grains of wheat under a stone millstone. Although she had never planted wheat, she had seen how her clansmen dealt with the food they bought from the north. There was no doubt that she would not be able to stand up for the rest of her life, let alone fight. But now, she was still standing. So it was a dream. Only in a dream could she change reality. Lorgar took a deep breath and looked forward. There was an endless sand road under her feet. Every once in a while, she would meet an opponent. Yes, the opponents she had defeated in her life were now walking towards her in turn. There was no ridicule or sarcasm. They passed by her one by one and then disappeared into the endless yellow sand behind her. The first one was a sandworm. It was the result of her first hunt when she was 12 years old. When it sneaked in the sand, it would leave a clear track, which was the easiest time to find and kill it. Once it quietly lurked, it was difficult to find its position. However, in fact, the Sand Nation was the most cunning hunter in the desert. She disguised herself as a bush, and when the sandworm approached, she stabbed her spear into the hot sand and directly pierced its head. This record was better than her brother and sister. Even among the big clans in Iron Sand City, it was considered excellent. It was this hunt that made her enjoy confrontation and the pleasure of fighting. This time, the sandworm did not dive into the ground. Instead, it raised its head and slid slowly on the sand like a snake. For a moment, Lorgar even thought that it would spit acid at her and corrode her beyond recognition. But in the end, nothing happened. It just quietly passed by her. Next was the scorpion and the wolf of the desert, her second and third opponents. The former left her, but the latter stopped. The wolf of the desert hesitated for a moment, then wagged its tail and walked to her side. It sniffed her bare feet full of calluses, then turned around and walked side by side with her. Lorgar remembered that it was an extremely cruel challenge. If a Majin woman wanted to become a qualified duelist, she had to put in a lot more effort than a man. After hunting a large number of sandworms and scorpions without stopping, she set her eyes on the wolves. However, a pack of wolves moving together was far more terrifying than she had expected. A sandstorm scattered the team, and when the storm subsided, a dense pack of wolves appeared on the horizon. The besieged Sand Nation tried to fight back, but they were no match for the sharp claws and fangs that came at them from all directions. Her clansmen fell one by one. She thought that she would be buried here, but she didn't expect that at the last moment, a tearing pain would take over her. Then, she awakened and became a goddess. An incomparably huge wolf king. She stood in the yellow sand that was dyed red with blood and looked down at the pack of wolves. Everywhere she looked, the wolves fell to their knees, as if they were kneeling to pay their respects to the god who controlled their fate. After awakening, the road suddenly became much wider. The best of her age, the clan's warriors, the battle-hardened warriors, they came one by one and disappeared one by one. Lorgar's heart gradually tightened. Perhaps when the last opponent passed by her, this dream would also end. There was not much time left for her to walk. She wanted to slow down a little more, but it didn't work. Not long after, the ground became dark, as if a huge monster was passing over her head. Lorgar looked up and saw the figure of the four-winged eagle. The last moment, it was here. At the same time, the wolf of the desert beside her let out a roar, its body suddenly expanded, and it pounced on the ruler of the sky. The two giant beasts fiercely collided, blood and feathers splattering everywhere, as if they wanted to finish the duel on the burning platform that had not yet been decided. Lorgar held her breath and stared at the end of her battle. Every time she fought, her body would faithfully record all the feelings she felt. This was also the reason why her growth rate was far faster than that of ordinary people. If she fought with this monster again, she firmly believed that she could last longer, and even before Ashes could intervene, she could bite off the other's head. Unfortunately, she couldn't wait for this opportunity. The battle quickly became white-hot. Lorgar wanted to rush up and fight side by side with the giant wolf, but she found that her body was completely unable to move, and even her feet began to lose feeling. She realized that she was about to wake up from the dream. This fear clutched her heart and made her tremble all over. No, she didn't want to spend the rest of her life lying in bed like a useless person. She wanted to stand up. She wanted to continue fighting. However, the feeling of confinement was getting stronger and stronger. It had already spread from his legs to his neck. At this moment, he could not even move his neck. Suddenly, the desert wolf's abdomen was pecked open by the eagle's beak. It let out a mournful cry. It staggered 2 steps with its intestines and fell weakly in the direction where Lorgar was standing. Even though it had lost the ability to fight back, it still used its broad back to block all the enemy's attacks for her. Every peck was like a knock on her heart. No! Lorgar suddenly opened her eyes and sat up. In an instant, the sand rode and the giant beast disappeared without a trace. The maid beside her exclaimed, "Your Highness, you're awake." That's right. She was in a daze for a while and woke up from her dream. The last time she was standing was also. Wait, Lorgar couldn't help but be stunned. She clearly saw the maidservant run to the bed in a panic and wipe the cold sweat off her body. The roof of the old tent, the weapons hanging on the wall, and the burning brazier, all of them were extremely clear. How could it be possible to do this with only one eye? She subconsciously reached out to touch her left eye and felt that it was intact. No, not only her eye, both her arms were also fine. There was not a trace of soreness on her body, and even her feet. Lorgar suddenly lifted the quilt, turned over from the bed, and then stood firmly on the ground. This is... She looked at the maid, who was shocked out of her wits. That group of northerners brought a new divine lady and healed all of your wounds, the maid stuttered as she explained. She didn't even use any herbs. With just a touch of her hand, your wounds healed again. In the city of Neverwinter in Grey Castle, there's a witch called Nana. She has the ability to heal any injury. Even if you're on the verge of death, or if your limbs are all broken, she can still heal your wounds. Ash's words suddenly came to Lorgar's mind. She didn't say those words to comfort her, but there really was such a magical witch. Where are they? Lorgar quickly put on her coat. I have to go and thank her. They've already left. What? She frowned. What about Ashes? She's not in Iron Sand City either. 2 days ago, the Osha clan took the first group of Sand Nation to the southern region of Grey Castle. Really? The wolf girl's movements slowed down. How many days have I been in a coma? The maidservant timidly stretched out 3 fingers and then added 3 more. 6 days. What a long dream. She sighed. Did anything else happen in Iron Sand City during this time? Yes, the Wildwave clan annexed the heavily damaged Blackwater clan, and then issued a holy challenge to us. The little girl's expression was a little downcast. Lord Patriarch, he didn't accept the challenge, but directly admitted defeat. Wildflame's ranking has fallen to the 3rd place. We can't continue to live in this stone castle. Really? Lorgar raised her eyebrows. I'm going to see my father. Ah. Wait, Your Highness, your hood and cloak. The maidservant ran to the door with a stack of clothes in her hands. There have been a lot of outsiders in the castle recently. Some are here to discuss matters with the chief, and some are. Her voice suddenly became as thin as gossamer as she spoke. They're here to drive us away, aren't they? Lorgar reached out to touch the pointy ears on the top of her head and then smiled at her. Keep them. I don't need them anymore. Huh? But, before becoming the chief, she had to hide her inhuman features as much as possible. Even if she was a divine lady, her unusual appearance would arouse rejection and suspicion. This was a warning from her father. But after walking through the long sand road in her dream, she had already understood what she wanted. Half human and half beast. Monster. That didn't stop her from continuing to fight, right? Chapter 784. Along the way, she saw many frowning clansmen walking back and forth with luggage on their backs. Obviously, they were sad and reluctant to leave the stone castle. Once they fell to the 3rd rank, Not only would their assigned rooms be much smaller, some of them would even have to move to the outer street camp area. Although it was still within the territory of Iron Sand City, living there was obviously not as convenient as in the core area. After all, the limited territories around the oasis and the lake were all occupied by the stone castles of the big clans. Lorgar memorized the expressions of these people one by one. When she arrived at the door of her father's bedchamber, the guard immediately showed an irrepressible joy when he saw her. "Your Highness, your injury is really healed." "Yes, I'm as good as before." Lorgar smiled. "Is father in the room?" "The chief has always been there, but..." The guard was a little hesitant. "There are other people in the room." She didn't need to ask who those people were. She had already guessed a thing or two. Through the door, she could clearly hear the argument inside. "Didn't we agree to leave in 3 days? Why hasn't the main castle been vacated until today?" Someone shouted. "Do you want to violate the oath of the 3 gods? Watch your attitude, Kabucha." The one who replied seemed to be her eldest brother Rohan. "Since you've annexed the Black River clan, you should first ask them to give up their territory so that we can move in. Now the stone castle is still covered with mourning cloth. Do you want us to move in now? You can send your men to tear it apart. The chief only wants to see the result, not to hear your explanation." "You. Oh, since you've admitted defeat in the holy duel, don't put on your high and mighty face. Your chief hasn't said anything yet. Who do you think you are? Get out of the way." "That's right. If you don't agree, we can fight again." The others echoed. Shing, then came the sound of swords being unsheathed. The guard also drew his weapon and was about to go in to help, but was stopped by Lorgar. "Leave it to me." "But..." The guard's lower lip squirmed. Finally, he lowered his head under her unquestionable gaze and swallowed the rest of his words. "I understand, Your Highness." Lorgar pushed the door open and walked into the room with a sullen face. The few warriors of the Wildwave clan stood fearlessly with their arms crossed. They didn't care about the shiny tip of the blade on their necks. They were obviously sure that Kuang Yen wouldn't dare to make a move. In fact, whether it was Rohan or his father's guards, they only dared to point their weapons at each other's vital points. As a result, Wildflame was at a disadvantage in terms of momentum. Guel's Burnflame sat behind a square table. The fire reflected in his eyes was dark and uncertain. The atmosphere was extremely quiet. "Put your things away." Her voice broke the tense atmosphere of confrontation. Guel's immediately smiled. "You're finally awake. Third sister, this is great." Rohan's eyes widened in disbelief as he watched her walk towards the crowd. His words were somewhat incoherent. It was hard to tell from his expression whether he was surprised or pleasantly surprised. Lorgar suddenly understood something. It seemed that her father had not completely revealed the news of the goddess of the north. Except for those who took care of her and her father's guards, most people were probably still in the dark. Even Rohan was so surprised, not to mention the warriors of the Wildwave clan. Lorgar. Didn't you get seriously injured in the holy duel?" "That's impossible. I clearly saw her legs being crushed into a pile of mud when she was dragged off the platform." "What's that, wolf ears and tail?" "She's a monster." She walked step by step to the side of the Wildwave warrior, who was obviously not as calm as before. No matter what, Kuang Yen has already admitted defeat to the Wildwave clan on the burning platform. This is the result witnessed by the 3 gods. Even if you want to challenge again, you'll have to wait for 6 months. In order to avoid deliberately admitting defeat and preserve their strength, those who surrendered were not allowed to challenge the winner within 6 months. This was a rule recognized by all the Sand Nation people. "We will abide by this result, just like we believe in the 3 gods." Lorgar's reply made the warriors slightly relieved. However, before they could completely relax, the second half of her sentence made the atmosphere tense again. "So, who's Kabucha?" "I am." The leader of the Wild Wave warriors braced himself and took a step forward. Why? Since you abide by the result of the duel, you should move out as soon as possible. You're no longer the leader of the clan. Do you still want to occupy this stone castle? What answered him was a straight punch to the face. Although Kabucha was also a good fighter, he was still defenseless in the face of the wolf's claws that had suddenly enlarged. His whole body was sent flying, directly smashing through the door of the bedchamber, and fell outside like a piece of rag. The others glared at him, but no one dared to rush forward. Even if the Wild Flame clan is reduced to the third clan, the dignity of the chief is not something you can offend. Moreover, this is the hinterland of the clan. Who allowed you to be so presumptuous? Lorgar shouted. This punch is just a lesson. Get out of here. The moment she stepped into the room, the situation had been reversed. The Wild Wave's previous provocation was based on the great increase in strength after annexing Blackwater. Whether it was a holy duel or a private contest, they were confident that they could defeat the Wild Flame clan. However, when the third princess of the Wild Flame clan appeared in front of them in good condition, this confidence was gone. Even if the other party could not initiate a holy duel within 6 months, the loss caused by a giant desert wolf from time to time to harass the Wild Wave clan was unacceptable. After all, they were the ones who offended them first. For the Sand Nation people, revenge was equally sacred. The Wild Wave warriors supported Kabucha, whose face was covered in blood, and left without saying a word. Father, since third sister is safe and sound, we can return to this stone castle in 6 months, right? Rohan clenched his fists excitedly. Or you can negotiate with the chief of the Wild Wave clan. Maybe you don't even have to move. Anyway, there's no chance of winning. He should do you a favor. The other guards were also excited. Yes, the prince is right. I'll go and ask everyone to stop. Also, don't forget to drive out the Wild Wave clan members who are staying in the stone castle. Also, ask them to move the things they brought with them. Everyone was talking at once. Gwel's Burnfire coughed twice and looked at his daughter. What do you think? The room suddenly became much quieter. Everyone was waiting for the third princess's answer. Rohan bit his lips lightly, and there was a touch of sadness in his eyes. Chapter 785. As soon as he said that, everyone present was stunned. Sister, no. What are you talking about? Rohan was the first to recover from the shock. Leave here. What about the clan? What about the holy duel? Where do you want to go? Lorgar did not answer. She just looked at her father quietly. Gwels could not help but smile bitterly. He let out a long sigh and waved his hand at the others. Leave us. Let me talk to her alone. Father. Rohan opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he swallowed the second half of his words. Although the guards were also very surprised, Lorgar was the daughter of the chief after all. With puzzled expressions, they faithfully carried out the order. Soon, only the father and daughter were left in the room. Do you want to go to the Northern Kingdom? Gwels asked directly. Yes. Lorgar did not hide her thoughts. I'll go to the southern territory of Greycastle first. After I find Ashes, I'll follow her to Neverwinter. What about the Wild Flame clan? They'll settle down in the southern territory. There are oases everywhere, and there's no need to fight each other for water and food. She paused for a moment. In fact, you've already planned to do that. That's why you didn't accept the challenge from the Wild Wave clan. Gwels raised his eyebrows and did not comment. Lorgar continued, the strength of the opponent is not a reason for you to give in. Before I awakened and became a divine lady, the Wild Flame clan had been the leader of the clan for decades. Even if the Wild Wave clan, which has swallowed Blackwater, is indeed powerful and even stronger than the Wild Flame clan, you'll definitely make them pay a price. We've always relied on this momentum to gain a foothold in the largest stone castle in Iron Sand City. Therefore, the only reason why you didn't accept the duel is because the holy duel for the position of Iron Sand City's leader is meaningless. The clansmen can fight for the future of the clan, but you can't bear to let those young and brave warriors bleed and die because of a meaningless battle. Am I right, father? Gwels stared at her for a while with a straight face. He couldn't help but smile and shake his head. I really don't know if you're born smart or as sharp as a wolf. Maybe it's both. In fact, I've been delaying the relocation because I wanted to ask for your opinion after you woke up. I don't understand these things, and I have nothing to do with the intelligence and sharpness you speak of. I just believe in my fists. Lorgar shook her long ears. Fist? Yes, as long as I fight with him once, I can feel what kind of person my opponent is. When I was young, you were the one who personally taught me how to fight. From fists and kicks to swords, I've endured them all. Naturally, I can guess your intentions. What a comforting statement. Gwels laughed. What about Ashes? Can we trust her too? She is like a mountain, so tall that it makes people despair. But mountains have always been silent and disdained to lie. And from her, I can feel the faith of protection, Lorgar said slowly. Those who are protected by her must feel very warm and secure. Hearing you say that, I feel much more at ease. Gwels seemed to have made up his mind. Since we're going to the Southern Territory, why don't you wait a few more days and travel with us? I don't want to wait a moment longer, father. As long as I face the north, I can feel my heart beating fast. Lorgar pressed her chest and said, it's urging me to leave as soon as possible. Besides, if we get there before the clans, we can also see if they're really like what they say, that every sand nation can enjoy an oasis. Weren't you completely convinced just now? Gwels laughed. I believe in Ashes, not the great chief behind the scenes. Just because Ashes can't lie doesn't mean she can't be deceived. Lorgar raised her fist. If the king of Greycastle dares to lie to us, I'll definitely teach him a lesson. What if what Zal Silvermoon said is true? The great chief treats the Sand Nation of Majin like the people of the Northern Kingdom. Will you be loyal to him? Or will you serve him like your mother? Gwels asked with interest. If you just want to fight with his subordinates, I'm afraid he won't welcome you. I won't. Who would like a half-human, half-beast monster? The short hair on Lorgar's tail suddenly stood up, and she unconsciously looked away. And I heard from Ashes that there are extremely powerful foreign enemies there. That's why I'm going there. It has nothing to do with serving him. Even if I need the help of a healing witch, I'll pay for it. The chief of the Wild Flame Chief did not tease her anymore. Instead, he waved at her and said, come here, let me take a good look at you. Lorgar walked up to her father, bent down as usual, and rested her head on his legs. The latter lovingly stroked her hair and furry ears and whispered, you'll come back, won't you? Yes. Lorgar closed her eyes. Since the people of Greycastle can come to Iron Sand City, so can I. If we move to the Southern Territory, it'll be closer. I'll go back to my clan often. As for the chief's position, if you don't want it, you can give it to my eldest brother. In fact, he's more suitable for this position than I am. If we don't have to fight for the oasis with bloodshed, he'll be an excellent leader. Don't mention that now, Gwels said. Even if you don't have time to come back, don't forget to write. Since we've moved to the Northern Kingdom, it's not bad to learn from them. Don't you think my handwriting is ugly? Fool, he snorted. When people leave their homeland, they always leave something behind. If you don't want to write, just leave your hair. Well, I'd better write, Lorgar said, wagging her tail. After nightfall, she walked out of Iron Sand City with a bag much taller than herself on her back. No one saw her off, and few people even knew that the goddess of Wild Flame was about to embark on her journey. Passing through the small oasis in the periphery, she walked into the silent and deserted desert. She looked around to make sure there was no one nearby, and then she took off her clothes. After folding her clothes and stuffing them into her luggage, Lorgar slowly stood up and stood naked against the cold wind. She didn't feel cold, but there was an inexplicable feeling flowing through her body. It was as if an invisible giant hand was caressing her, and the things that bound and covered her no longer existed. In this cold wind, she became a new person. Then the fluff grew out of her body, and her body continued to expand. After a few breaths, a huge desert wolf appeared in this vast desert sea of sand. She raised her head and let out a long, carefree howl. Ow 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 ow, ah 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 ah, woo 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 woo, her howl echoed over the desert. Lorgar believed that the Wild Flame clan must have heard her howl. Chapter 786. On the last day of the winter, a mixed expedition team composed of Neverwinter and Tequila survivors finally set off for the west of the western region. Roland stood by the dock and watched as the cement boat slowly left the dock. This expedition could be regarded as the most complicated one in history. The First Army, the Witch Union and the Tequila Witches would cooperate with each other to thoroughly search the Great Snow Mountain. If everything went well, they would arrive at the source of the Redwater River in 3 days and then choose a leeward harbor to set up camp. At that time, the vanguard team would use Maggie's magic arc to find the location of the ruins, and then Fran, who controlled the devouring worm, would open a passage on the mountain wall for the main team to enter. This plan was just like digging a thief's hole to sneak into the tomb left by his ancestors. Roland was very curious about the possible ruins of civilization in the Great Snow Mountain. Unfortunately, since the last time he was pierced through by a demon spear, Vendi and Skrull would never agree to go with him. Of course, this didn't mean that the investigation team would lower their level of vigilance. Considering that there might be invisible demonic beasts that had appeared in the concealing forest in the vicinity of the snowy mountain, Roland also sent Nightingale out. After all, if the team was too long, Sylvie would not be able to take care of the whole team, especially if they had to split up. The Tequila also took out the last 3 5-colored stones to detect any units with magic power. According to Pasha, as long as there was magic power, there would be a beam of light above their heads. The demons and demonic hybrids were no exception, but their beams of light were very small. 50 gods' punishment witches, 500 soldiers of the First Army, and a large number of high-level awakened witches, this force was absolutely invincible on the continent. If everyone could successfully return from this operation, it would undoubtedly lay the foundation for the mixed warfare between ordinary people, extraordinary warriors, and various witches in the future. Let's go back. Roland touched the snow on his nose and said to Anna. The latter raised her head and smiled. During Nightingale's absence, the task of protecting the king was handed over to Anna. But for the two of them who were already very familiar with each other, staying together to protect each other at all times wasn't uncomfortable at all. Instead, it became a rather natural thing. Roland took her hand and walked towards the castle. When he entered the hall, he was surprised to see Phyllis. "You didn't follow them to the Great Snow Mountain?" Roland raised his eyebrows and asked. "I thought you'd be more interested in exploring the underground ruins." "You're right, but Pasha wants me to stay." Phyllis shrugged. "I'm the most familiar with the situation in the castle, and your subordinates have a basic impression of me. I'm indeed the most suitable person for the job of protection." It was Tequila's request to leave a god's punishment witch to guard the castle. Although Anna's ability was powerful, it was completely useless in the face of the god's stone of retaliation. At the same time, her fighting talent was far inferior to her learning ability. Once she lost her ability, both of them would be in danger. Considering this, Pasha insisted on arranging a god's punishment witch to be the frontline protector. They could control the anti-magic area at will, so they were the nemesis of almost all witches. Their bodies were immune to pain, and they could fight under extremely harsh conditions. Even if the enemy was an extraordinary, the god's punishment which would not be at a disadvantage. "Then I'll have to trouble you," Roland replied habitually. "It's my duty." She nodded. "Usually, I'll stay in the hall. If anything happens, I'll come to your side as soon as possible." He knew that Phyllis did this to avoid arousing suspicion. There was enough buffer space between the first floor and the office, so there was a delicate balance between the protector and the protected. If Tequila insisted on arranging the protector in the office, even if it was for his safety, it would only cause more displeasure. Pasha's final decision to leave Phyllis, who had spent more time with the witches, should be based on this consideration. Of course, although the gods' punishment witches were the most powerful insurance, Roland would not put his own safety in the hands of his allies. Guards and the First Army were arranged to guard the stairways and the bedroom doors on each floor of the castle. They would rotate every 8 hours to ensure that the defense was foolproof. When he returned to the office, Scroll was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, waiting for him. "Your Majesty," she bowed meticulously and handed him a report. "Lily's derivative ability has been confirmed." "Oh." Roland's eyes lit up. He took the report and carefully read it. Winter was about to pass. Although the months of demons had not yet ended, most witches had safely passed their day of awakening. Among them, Lily was the most special. She had ushered in her magic power, adulthood, a week ago. Like Lucia, Roland personally accompanied her to undergo the baptism on her day of adulthood. Apart from the great progress in her magic power, what was more gratifying was that she felt that her ability had gained something. Lily was undoubtedly a lucky girl. On the day of adulthood, she had awakened her own derivative ability. However, she was not able to quickly comprehend the usage of her derivative ability. Unlike her main ability, derivative abilities were more difficult to detect, and the connection with witches was not as strong as the main ability. For example, Scroll had gradually mastered the usage of the Book of Magic after 2 years of adulthood. But this was not a big problem. According to Agatha's experience, she only needed to repeatedly use her main ability and then slowly explore it. Few witches would awaken a derivative ability that had nothing to do with their main ability. In other words, if the main ability was the root, then the derivative ability was the branch and leaf, which could supplement and strengthen the main ability to a certain extent. For example, Sylvie's magic power recognition and Soroya's paintbrush were all the same. After reading the report, Roland was surprised. She can now absorb the mother body into her body and keep it there. And not just one. Scroll nodded. This was accidentally discovered by Lily during an experiment. After the assimilation, the mother body drilled into her body through physical contact and lurked. She thought that summoning the mother body again would make the former disappear, but in fact, it could still drill out of her body again under Lily's consciousness and continue to assimilate other small creatures. Roland quickly realized what this meant. After the second evolution, although the little girl could turn the mother body into a specific microorganism, the premise was that she could see it. On the other hand, the derivative ability simplified this process, turning seeing it live into having seen it before. In other words, now she could collect the transformed mother bodies in advance, and when needed, she could release the corresponding swarm of insects. The degree of convenience was greatly improved. It was conceivable that as the precision of the microscope continued to improve, the variety of mother bodies carried by Lily would also become more abundant. It could simply be called a mobile, living biochemical bomb warehouse. Chapter 787. After Scroll left, only Roland and Anna were left in the office. Roland opened a half-written textbook, intending to finish it. He picked up the quill but hesitated for a long time. He found that he always unconsciously looked at Anna, as if his eyes were attracted by her figure. "What's wrong?" Anna also noticed his gaze, put down the parts in her hands, looked up and asked with a smile. "No, nothing." Roland gently shook his head. "If you feel bored here, let's go to the backyard of North Slope Mountain." She pursed her lips and said, "It's not boring at all. I can finish the work at hand here. Most importantly, as long as you're with me, it doesn't matter where we are." This kind of slightly embarrassing words, only she could say it so matter-of-factly. "Okay." Roland responded with a smile and did not insist. He knew that Anna would not say anything against her heart. As the first witch he met after coming to this world, Roland already knew her temperament well. Except for academic discussions and bed whispers, most of the time Anna was quiet and calm, especially when she was focused on business. But he did not feel bored at all. For the two of them, silence was also a kind of communication. In particular, the occasional eye contact between them had already revealed what they wanted to express. Roland simply put down the quill and enjoyed the serious look of the other with a peace of mind. Her silhouette was a beautiful sight at any time. Her flaxen hair had grown a lot longer and almost covered her fair neck. Her blue eyes were still as clear as a lake. She wore a fluffy light yellow sweater and a pair of comfortable black flannelette straight trousers, looking youthful and lively. This set of modern clothes and accessories was naturally made by him. In order to work in the office, Anna had cut the metal ingots into palm-sized cubes in advance. She only needed to ask someone to transport them to the castle and then process them with the black fire. Roland could not help but be amazed as he watched the metal ingots being quickly turned into full plates of spare parts. To a certain extent, the skills and level of processing she demonstrated were no different from art. These seemingly unremarkable components would eventually be sent to factories and become a vital part of many machines or weapons. It was not easy to do this. He knew that the length and width of the black fire were controlled by magic, and summoning multiple black fire to cut from different angles was more difficult than using both hands to write different content at the same time. It required a high degree of concentration. Perhaps only someone as serious as Anna could devote herself to this job day after day. Compared to the girl who had painstakingly practiced controlling flames in the castle's garden, everything had undoubtedly changed a lot, yet it was as if nothing had changed. Just like that, a day quickly passed. Night fell. After Roland fell asleep with Anna in his arms, the other world had just woken up. He yawned and tilted his head to look at the calendar on the short cabinet beside the bed. The clock was pointing to Saturday, October 14th. Although time passed much faster in the dream world than in the real world, he did not enter this world every night. As long as he was not dreaming, time stood still in this world. He walked into the living room, where breakfast was already on the table. "Why did you get up so late today?" Zero asked while chewing a fried dough stick. "It's a holiday. Adults have a lot of nightlife, so it's normal to sleep late." He walked into the bathroom and picked up a cup and toothbrush. "Are you going out later?" "No, I have to do my homework." The little girl replied, and then muttered as if she was talking to herself. "Nightlife? He came back earlier than me. At first glance, I know he's a frustrated uncle who has neither friends nor a career." Her voice was not loud, but it was just loud enough for him to hear. It was obvious that she did it on purpose. Roland almost choked on his mouthwash. It was already too much to call him uncle before, but now he had become an uncle. He looked in the mirror and found that his appearance was not much different from the real world. No matter how he looked, he was still 23 or 24 years old. Even if his singlet and shorts were a little shabby, it should not be that bad. It could only be attributed to the poor taste of children. He decided not to argue with a silly little girl. "Then open the door for me later. I'm going out, so I won't bring the key." "Got it." When he finished washing up, Zero had already finished her breakfast and returned to her room. Roland slowly sat at the dining table, picked up the remote control, and turned on the TV. Today was the day he had arranged to meet Garcia. After several months of effort, he had basically collected all the professional teaching materials and materials he could buy and piled them up in his bedroom. Later, he just needed to copy them. However, his plan to explore the memory fragments had run into a wall. No residents in the Apartment of Souls were willing to rent a house easily. So far, he had only succeeded twice, and the fragments in the Gate of Memory were not valuable. There were more than 2,000 residents in this building, and he was afraid that selling armors alone would not be able to provide such a large amount of money. After all, he could not sell the armors as real antiques, and the probability of attracting the attention of the police was not much lower than the probability of directly breaking into someone's house to search. After thinking about it, there were only two reliable ways: to increase the source of income, or to expand his reputation. If he could become as famous as Garcia in the tube-shaped block, it would be much easier for him to rent or persuade people to move out. Or he could earn enough money and buy the entire tube-shaped block. Regardless of which one it was, the most likely way to achieve it was to join the Martialist Association. According to Garcia, as long as one participated in the task of hunting fallen evils, he would be rewarded handsomely. And if a powerful martialist was willing to appear on the stage, the association would fully support him. However, when it came to the matter of the reward, Garcia looked a little disdainful, as if what they were doing was to protect human beings from the fallen evils, rather than for money. Roland expressed his admiration for Garcia's righteousness and asked about the specific rules of the reward in detail. In the first place, he was not willing to work for this eccentric organization, which emphasized responsibility and dedication, but whose behavior was somewhat similar to the masterminds behind the scenes, let alone work for free. He would not have decided to join the Martialist Association if he had not made little progress in the past few months. At 10:00 sharp, he put on a suit and went out. Although the meeting place was room 0827, he could not be too casual as he was submitting an official application to the association. However, before he took 2 steps, he suddenly heard a childish scream behind him. It was from Zero. Roland was stunned for a moment. As soon as he turned around, he saw the little girl running out of the apartment with a panicked expression. "What's wrong? Is there a mouse?" There's a person in the room." Zero stammered, pointing at the door. "A person?" Roland frowned and went back to the door of room 0825 to take a look. He was immediately stunned. Chapter 788. She had long, brownish-yellow hair, and her bangs parted to one side, revealing half of her forehead. Her facial features were very soft, giving people the impression that she was a gentle and moving woman. But in this case, the more beautiful she was, the weirder she looked. Female ghosts were usually gentle and elegant. Moreover, the robe she was wearing was too old. Not only was the thread rough, but the cuffs and corners of the robe were also tattered, as if they were picked up from a junkyard. I heard the sound of you going out, so I wanted to check if you had closed the door properly. When I turned around, I saw that there was one more person behind me." Zero's face was pale, and it was obvious that she was quite frightened. The woman seemed to notice the movement here. She looked up at the door, and her expression suddenly changed. Roland subconsciously clenched his fists, ready to receive the attack. Unexpectedly, what she said next surprised him. "Roland. Your Majesty." "What? Your Majesty." You are." He tried to sound her out. "I'm Phyllis." "Your Majesty, what's going on now?" The woman was as confused and puzzled as he was. "Phyllis?" Roland's mind raced, and a series of questions emerged one after another. The god's punishment which guarding the castle hall. Why was she brought into the dream world? Was this world changing from closed to open? Where was Anna? Why didn't she show up? Wait, you know each other. Zero found something was wrong. What's Her Majesty? Are you role-playing? Ahem, she's a distant relative of mine. Roland suddenly realized that it was not the time to be in a daze. As for Her Majesty, it's just a joke. She grew up with me, so it's not strange for her to be called anything. Relative? Seeing that it was not a ghost, the little girl quickly regained her courage, and at the same time, she became more suspicious. You just asked who she was. Did I? His expression did not change as he said, I only saw a coward wailing in fear, almost wetting his pants. Zero's cheeks suddenly turned red. You're talking nonsense. Didn't that scream come from you? She was already in the room, but you were doing your homework in your bedroom and didn't notice. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. Roland was also amazed by the strange woman's comprehension ability. When His Majesty left, I happened to go to another room. I came out to say hello, but you ran out screaming. I guess that's probably the case. She asked what was going on, but she was actually frightened by you, Roland added. If I saw a kid screaming as soon as I stepped out of the house, I would also be confused. I. Zero was at a loss for words. The scream was the truth. She couldn't deny it, and she didn't have the habit of lying. She suddenly fell into a dilemma, and tears gradually welled up in her eyes. Well, it seems that I went too far. He bent down and touched the little girl's head. Anyway, this is a misunderstanding. Go back to your studies. You can't win in this contest between adults, Roland thought without any sense of guilt. Just take it as a baptism in the process of growing up. A life without being deceived by adults is incomplete. He thought Zero would run into the bedroom while sobbing, but he did not expect that she would take a deep breath and wipe away her tears. She then lifted her foot and kicked him in the leg. Uncle, you bastard! She then stormed back into the room. Roland could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth. Although the process was slightly different from what he had expected, at least the result was the same. Pfft, the woman who called herself Phyllis could not help laughing. It seems that you're not the supreme king here. But here, I'm the ruler of the world. Roland made an inviting gesture. Let's talk in my room. I also have a lot of questions to ask you. Half an hour later, Roland was finally convinced that the woman was Phyllis. She told him not only what had happened in Tequila, but also what she had seen and heard in the castle, as well as her experience of disguising as maid number 76 of Black Money. She even told him in great detail about some things that he did not know clearly, and could even link them together. At least based on this, he could rule out the possibility that she was a self-born consciousness of this world. It was impossible to achieve this by reading his memory. And the body that Phyllis had now was the appearance of her original body when her soul was extracted. Then the next question was obvious. Why did she enter the dream world? I don't know. Phyllis shook her head. It was very late at that time, and the First Army had just changed shifts. I planned to cut off the control of my body and use deep sleep to quickly recover my energy, but I didn't expect to be here when I opened my eyes. She paused. You called this place, the dream world? Yes, a world that only works when I'm dreaming, but I don't know if this rule is still valid. At this point, there was no need to hide anything. The most urgent thing was to find out why Phyllis had connected to the dream world. Although he had long known that this complicated world did not exist in his mind, it was still quite frightening to suddenly see an outsider break into his mind. After all, one thing was for sure, the dream world was constructed according to his memory, which was equivalent to someone entering his memory without permission. Roland unfolded the ladder behind the door and placed it beside the bed. Maybe we can test it to find out why you came to the dream world. What's this? Phyllis asked in surprise. When I fall from the top, the dream world will end. You can try it first to see if you can return to the real world. Then I'll interrupt the dream world. If you can get out of it successfully, wait for me in the hall. I'll come down immediately, Roland explained. Wait. Your Majesty. Phyllis suddenly reached out and grabbed him. Roland was quite surprised by this behavior. If they were in Neverwinter, this would undoubtedly be considered a rude behavior. She could not possibly forget the customs of the past hundreds of years just because she suddenly came to a strange environment, could she? Can you pinch me hard? She asked in a low voice. What? Roland was stunned. Please pinch me as hard as you can, okay? Phyllis rolled up her sleeves and put her snow-white arm in front of him. Pain won't wake you up from the dream. I've confirmed that. I just want to feel, please. Feel? Thinking of Agatha's description of the gods' punishment witches, Roland immediately understood what she was thinking. After a moment of silence, he stretched out his right hand and twisted Phyllis's wrist. Phyllis clenched her teeth and let out a satisfied moan from her throat. Her whole body trembled like a traveler who had been thirsty for a long time and suddenly drank sweet nectar. After a long time, she opened her eyes and let out a long sigh. God above, I can feel pain again. Phyllis seemed to have become a different person at this moment. She looked at Roland with her eyes almost shining. You can do it yourself. He spread out his hands. Chapter 789. Roland could not help but fall silent. That's right. For him, the five senses were just an inherent attribute of the world, not something rare. He also regarded the dream world as a fictitious fantasy land because it was weird and incomplete. However, for Phyllis, this was the perfect world she had been dreaming of. The significance of this world was probably no less than that of a lamp suddenly appearing in a pitch-black abyss. No matter what kind of difficulties and obstacles she would encounter, she would still move forward in the direction of the light regardless of her own safety. If her intrusion was really just an accident and she could not enter again once she left, what she would lose would probably be far beyond his imagination. It was too cruel for Phyllis to come to the long-lost perfect world, only to relive the pain in the end. Roland sighed softly and reached out to pull her up. I see. Let's do the test tonight. 2 days in the dream world was almost equivalent to a whole night in the real world. It was not a big problem to postpone the test to the evening, but she could use this time to enjoy this new world. Thank you, Your Majesty. Phyllis stood up and raised her elbow to her chest to salute him again, which was a special etiquette that members of the Union performed to their superiors. Now I somewhat understand why you could win the support of the Witch Union. Just when Roland was about to say something, the bedroom door was suddenly knocked on and Zero's voice came from outside. I've made tea. Do you want some? This girl, what the hell is she doing? According to her usual habits, she would definitely not want to see me for most of the day after being provoked, let alone boil water to make tea. What was she doing by constantly knocking on the door and forcing me to drink tea? He frowned and opened the door, but the little girl's hands were empty. She first glared at Roland, then poked her head in and looked at Phyllis from head to toe, her eyes full of vigilance. Hey, where's the tea? It's in the living room. Go and get it yourself. Zero snorted coldly. By the way, don't make any strange sounds and disturb me from doing my homework. Then she swung her hands and left. So that's the reason. Roland didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he shook his head. Kids nowadays know too much. If it were me in the past, I wouldn't have thought about it in such a strange way. They would only ask him where he was feeling unwell and if he needed to go to the hospital. Closing the door again, he shrugged and said, Don't worry about it. Children born after 2000 are like this. After all, times have changed. Millennials? Different times? Phyllis looked confused. Her relationship with you is... I'm just a lodger. Roland waved his hand and did not elaborate. Although he told her about the battle of souls between him and the Pope, he did not tell her that this kid was once the pure witch Pope. Zero had been reborn in the dream world and had nothing to do with her past, so there was no need to connect her with the other world. I understand. She bit her lip. Then, please continue. You can use other methods as well. This time, I will try my best not to make any noise. Roland could not help but hold his forehead. You're addicted to it. There are so many fun places in this world. Why are you so fixated on pain? Ahem. He cleared his throat. Since we're in the dream world, I'll take you out for a walk. Can I go out like this? Phyllis asked in surprise. This place is obviously different from Neverwinter. Won't it bring you trouble if others notice me? It turned out that she had not noticed the dramatic changes in the surrounding environment. She probably thought that this place was the same as the Four Kingdoms that discriminated against witches. People who were obviously different would be discriminated against and persecuted. If you're really a witch, you'll only be a star in the dream world. Roland laughed. I said, this is a new world. It's not harmful to be unique. Instead, you'll be sought after, provided that you don't violate the law. Is that so? Phyllis suddenly looked excited. There are taverns and hotels outside, right? Do you want to taste the wine and food? Roland raised the corner of his mouth. Of course, and there are more kinds than you can imagine. In other words, she had planned to stay in the room for the whole day and constantly savor the taste of pain. Although the lethality of torturing a gentle woman's face was extraordinary, he always felt that it would pull him into a highway of no return. That was close. I didn't make a big mistake. By the way, since you've changed back to your original body, can you still use magic power? Ah, if you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten about it. Phyllis exclaimed in a low voice. Please let me have a try. She closed her eyes and held her breath, but there was no movement for a long time. Can't I? No. I can feel the magic cyclone. It's just that I haven't used it for a long time, so I'm not used to it, she said with some embarrassment. Please wait a moment, it'll come out soon. As soon as she finished speaking, 2 black claws rushed out from her back and raised to both sides of her shoulders. At first glance, it looked like a pair of ghost hands or a pair of wings without feathers. Roland touched his chin and asked, "What's this?" "I call it the blade claw." Phyllis let out a long breath. The claws can be extended and retracted freely within the range of my ability, and they're much sharper than ordinary ironware. When I was fighting with the army of demons, they could protect me from sneak attacks from the rear, and they could also fight with me against powerful senior demons. So you used to be a combat witch? Yes, in the Tequila era, I served as the guard of the 3 chiefs. She paused. But there's one thing I don't quite understand. According to the research of the Quest Society, magic power should come from the bloody moon. Why does magic power also exist in the dream world? Although this world was built according to my will, I'm afraid it's also inseparable from the bloody moon. I'm still trying to figure it out. Let's talk about it later when we stroll around. Roland spread out his hands and said, "Since we've decided to postpone the test to the evening, let's not waste time now." "Yes, Your Majesty," Phyllis said excitedly. "Since it's Saturday, I'll take Zero with me. Otherwise, I don't know how long this little devil will be angry. Also, don't call me Your Majesty in the dream. Just call me Roland. There's no king in this era. Then, please forgive my rudeness." Chapter 790. You're not coming. Hey, what do you mean? You're late for so long, and now you're telling me. Roland could not help but turn his head to the other side of the phone. Even through the loudspeaker, he could feel Garcia's anger. "There's a guest in the house, and it's the kind that I have no choice but to receive," he quickly explained while she was panting. "I have no choice. You know, other than me, there's only a 14-year-old kid in the house. I can't let her serve the guest, can I? You live at 0825, right? I'm here to talk to you." I'm not in the tube-shaped apartment right now." Roland squinted his eyes as he said this, ready to receive a sound wave attack. As expected, Garcia raised her voice again. "Do you know that I've made an appointment with a senior member of the association? I thought you finally took responsibility. What's the big deal about running away? Don't think I don't know what you're up to. Come back now." What the hell does she mean by taking responsibility? Roland thought to himself. Seeing the taxi driver's expression of, "Good lad, I understand your difficulties," Roland knew that it was impossible for him to explain. "Hey, what did you say? The signal seems to be bad. I'm entering Oriental Road. Hey, are you still there? Hello. After his self-directed performance, he hung up the phone. Just in case, he turned off the power of his phone. He was afraid that he had completely offended this martial arts star. He did not expect that Garcia would be so concerned about his decision to join the Martialist Association. Garcia's reaction once again confirmed to him that her cold attitude was just a facade to strangers. Once he became awakened with the force of nature, her true nature would be revealed. "What an old-fashioned trick," Zero snorted behind him. "Do you think we're staying in the deep mountains and forests? How can we have a signal problem if we haven't left the city? You talk too much." Roland glanced at the back seat and saw Phyllis standing in front of the window, staring at everything outside in astonishment. Her posture had not changed since she got in the car. It was no wonder that she was surprised. Skyscrapers, dense traffic, huge billboards, and wall-hung screens were all things that could shock an ancient person. Just thinking about it was enough to know how shocking these things were. In fact, the progress of productivity had caused the rapid changes of the times. A city could undergo earth-shaking changes in just 20 years. Even the people living in the city might not be able to accept it, let alone the tequila witches. For this trip, Roland had changed Phyllis's ragged robe, according to her, it was a tequila uniform, into his own clothes. The short-sleeved shirt and sweatpants were gender-neutral, so Phyllis didn't have any problem wearing them. On the contrary, the cheap clothes made her look casual and fashionable. Roland had to admit that beauty was indeed a magical thing. The only problem was the chest binding. In the end, he could only ask Zero for help and solve this problem with the bandage. Therefore, the purpose of this shopping trip was very clear. In addition to taking the god's punishment which to eat and drink, the rest was to buy a set of clothes for her. What if she could enter the dream world again? She couldn't always wear his men's clothes and move around wrapped in bandages. Here we are. Green Valley Park. The driver pressed down the meter. $25. This park was not far from the apartment. It was also a high-quality green space that Roland had discovered when he was exploring the city. Not many people wandered here. There was a commercial street around it, and most importantly, there were Kaifeng Cuisine and Lon Lon Road chain stores. Yes, this was Roland's first choice. The environment of a roadside restaurant was too low and the taste was not up to standard. After all, this trip was to bring a wonderful experience to the guests from another world. Naturally, there were the most basic requirements for taste and environment. At the same time, it could satisfy the condition of letting the guests eat their fill. Those star-rated restaurants were obviously better, but if they ate as much as they wanted. Roland felt that his wallet would probably not be able to support such consumption. Therefore, a moderate fast food restaurant was obviously the most suitable choice. Besides, Zero had been clamoring to eat this for a long time. It was probably the doll toy that came with the children's meal that had a great attraction to the little ghosts. Leading the two into the Kaifeng Cuisine restaurant, Roland found a seat by the window and went to the counter. He directly ordered 2 family buckets and a children's meal. Why did you buy so much? Zero was surprised when she saw Roland holding a large plate of food on the table. Uncle, even if you have a job, don't waste it. Since it's rare for me to be generous, why don't you eat obediently? Oh. After the little girl took the set of toys, her pouting mouth finally relaxed a lot. You eat too. Tell me if it's not enough. Roland handed a piece of fried chicken to her. The skin of the chicken, which had been fried under high temperature and pressure, was a tempting golden color. Just the smell of it was enough to make people want to eat it. The chicken meat prepared with modern methods not only maintained its original tender and smooth texture, but also completely permeated the meat fibers with the freshness of black pepper, thyme, garlic salt, and other seasonings. The effect was completely incomparable to the white meat of that era. Fast food was often criticized for its high calorie content and the same taste, but in ancient times when food and seasoning were lacking, it was undoubtedly the best in the world, not to mention that Phyllis had not tasted it for hundreds of years. Along the way, she perfectly carried out Roland's instructions. No matter how novel the things were, she never asked and tried her best to imitate the behavior of others. But at this moment, she could no longer control herself. The moment she took the fried chicken and bit into it, 2 lines of tears burst out of her eyes and flowed down uncontrollably. Sister, this is... Zero could not help but be stunned. It's nothing. She just hasn't eaten for a long time. Phyllis's family doesn't treat her well. They always wanted a boy, but they never got what they wanted. In short, you won't understand even if I say more. You only need to know that she's had a hard time over there. So that's how it is. The little girl's expression instantly softened, probably because she empathized with Zero. Roland did not care why Zero called Phyllis sister, but called him uncle. He could not help but sigh in his heart as he watched the ancient witch gulp down the fast food while crying. In his eyes, it was a very ordinary enjoyment, but for them, it was a dream that they were willing to give up everything to pursue. The huge difference between the two inevitably made people feel sad. Fortunately, Phyllis had finally touched the edge of her dream, although she did not know whether there would be a next time. Chapter 791. This is so delicious. After a long time, Phyllis finally slowed down her swallowing. Every time other diners passed by, they would look at them in surprise. There were all kinds of lunch boxes on the table, from hamburgers to egg tarts. The amount was enough for 5 or 6 people to enjoy, but there were only 3 people sitting at the table. For this reason, Roland received a lot of disdainful looks. Compared to the 2 slender and attractive women in front of him, it was more likely that he had stuffed all the food into his stomach. "Wipe her tears," Roland said helplessly. At the same time, he felt lucky that he had taken her to a fast food restaurant instead of a high-end restaurant, otherwise, he would have emptied his wallet. Zero took out a wet wipe and wiped away the tears and oil stains on Phyllis's lips. Fortunately, witches were born beautiful and hardly needed to put on any makeup. Otherwise, this lunch full of tears would have smeared Phyllis's face. It was probably the first time that the little girl had seen such a miserable person, who was so happy that she even cried while eating Kaifeng food. Her sympathy for Phyllis was overflowing, and her attitude toward her changed by 180 degrees. "There are ice cream cones here, but we can talk about the dream first." Seeing that Phyllis was almost done eating, Roland took a sip of Coke and went straight to the point. "Did you notice anything strange or unusual before you entered the dream?" "But..." She glanced at Zero beside her. "It doesn't matter. It was just a childhood dream," Roland said with a wink. "I see." Phyllis immediately understood what he meant. "Indeed, it's been a long time. Let me think, there was nothing special at that time. I just leaned against the wall and cut off my consciousness as usual, which helped me recover quickly without completely losing my vigilance." "You can still sense the changes in the outside world after cutting off your consciousness?" She nodded. "I just stopped controlling my body and my consciousness sank into the darkness, but I could still sense danger around me. It wasn't something that came from sight or hearing, but an indescribable feeling. It was as if someone was reminding me of something in the dark." Celine called this phenomenon the latent connection. "If I'm drawn into a soul container, I'll be in a complete sleep without any consciousness." "What are you talking about?" Zero pouted. "Who's Celine?" "A psychiatrist. Children shouldn't interrupt when adults are talking." Roland glanced at her. "If you're bored, go to the park and watch others fish or fly kites. Don't stray too far from us." The little girl snorted in dissatisfaction, grabbed the ice cream cone, and walked out of the store. "Are you okay?" Phyllis asked, looking at her back through the French window. "It's okay. The security level in this era is very high. Most people can't fool her." Roland shrugged. "Go on." "Yes, once I enter deep sleep, I should be floating in an endless darkness. There's no light, no sound, nothing exists, and nothing can be done." The ancient witch paused. "But this time, the scene that appeared was your residence in the dream world. I was so surprised that I couldn't describe it in words. Fortunately, I soon saw you." "Well..." Roland thought for a moment. "In other words, the only difference this time is that you're in my castle." "That's the only difference." Phyllis swallowed the last ice cream cone and let out a long sigh of satisfaction. Seeing the yellow tip of the cone slowly disappear into the ancient witch's mouth, an idea suddenly flashed in Roland's mind. "Light pillar." "What? Didn't you say that when I fell asleep, a huge orange light pillar as wide as a city wall would appear?" "Yes, that's right." Phyllis was slightly startled, as if she realized something. And you also have a light pillar, don't you? You mean, our beams of light have overlapped? That's right. The Lord's castle in Border Town is just an ordinary stone building. It can't connect you to the dream world. After thinking about it, the only thing we have in common is the light pillar. Roland suddenly clapped his hands. But it's not enough to only rely on the overlapping light pillar. Otherwise, Anna and Nightingale would have entered the dream world long ago. Perhaps cutting off their consciousness is the key. Among all the descriptions of the tequila witches, the word soul had always puzzled him. Whether it was Scourge's shell or the strange biological carrier, the tequila survivors could control them by transferring their souls. But, what was a soul? According to Roland's understanding, a soul was a combination of thinking and memory. It was a phenomenon generated by the interaction of neurons through electric currents. It was not something that actually existed and could not exist without the body. However, the soul core of the underground civilization had changed this concept. It not only turned the soul into a substance that could exist out of thin air, but also carried it everywhere. At first, he had generally attributed it to the magic power, but now it seemed that it was very different from what he had imagined. What if thinking and memory could be analyzed? Assuming that the beam of light and the magic power came from the crimson moon, then the so-called soul might also be the same. At the moment when the soul core was activated, the person whose soul was extracted would form a complete memory in the crimson moon. The beam of light was just a transmission channel, so it caused the appearance of soul transfer. According to Pasha, because the magic power transformation was too complicated, God took over the process, which was reflected in the thickness of the light pillar. Regardless of whether it was correct or not, it was indeed much easier to simulate memories than to materialize magic power and create things out of thin air. Therefore, it was reasonable that the light pillar above the god's punishment witch's head was so small. Following this line of thought, the complexity of the dream world exceeded the ability of most witches. That was why the light pillar was as thick as the city wall. When Phyllis's consciousness was interrupted in this range, her thoughts in the bloody moon interacted with the dream world, and thus the vision of connecting to the dream world appeared. The more Roland thought about it, the more excited he became. He had been racking his brains for a long time, but now he could find a seemingly reasonable explanation from this hypothesis. If it was really caused by the overlapping light pillars, it meant that the dream world was indeed a part of the bloody moon. With the help of Zero's soul battlefield, he had left his own footprint in this god realm that controlled magic power. Chapter 792. It's a fallen evil. Run. He's just mutated. Call the police. Help me. I sprained my ankle. He's coming. Watch out. Ah. When Roland followed the crowd out of the restaurant, he found that the neighboring restaurant was already in chaos. Diners were scrambling to escape from the scene, but they were crowded together due to the limited evacuation passage. Hearing that a fallen evil had appeared, the people nearby turned around and ran away. Some of them took out their mobile phones to take pictures of the scene while retreating. Only a few volunteers insisted on carrying those who fell or were too scared to move out of the danger. Burp. Didn't you say that the security level in this era is very high? Phyllis touched her bloated belly, her face full of happiness, which was out of place in the horrified scene around her. Ahem, it's just an accident. Don't worry about it. Roland could not help feeling a little embarrassed. He was supposed to be the master of the world, but he was attacked while he was out for a meal. It was really embarrassing. Also, the fallen evil, mentioned by the assailant, also attracted his attention. Roland was not sure if it was an illusion, but he had seen more and more similar reports in the newspapers and news recently. It seemed that more and more people awakened the force of nature in the dream world, but most of them had become uncontrollable monsters. Thinking of the erosion from the outside world, mentioned by Garcia 2 months ago, Roland frowned. Who's the enemy? Phyllis asked. Do you need me to kill him? Or go back to the park to find Zero? Roland looked behind him and shook his head. The park is safe for now. Let's get rid of this guy first. He remembered that when he first met the burnt-faced man, he had shown his intention to lure the martialist to hunt him down. It was not a good choice to leave him alone and merge with Zero. Roland also felt a wonderful sense of fullness when the magic cyclone of the fallen evil dissipated. It was as if the warm current flowing in his body was greatly satisfied and his body became stronger. The enemy should be a newborn fallen evil. You can think of it as a hybrid demonic beast. However, the force of nature protects it from ordinary weapons, so it has to be restrained by the same force. Force of nature. It's the magic of this world, but there's no gender restriction. Roland bent down to pick up a stone, activated the surging aura in his body, and crushed it into a pile of powder. Just like me. Phyllis was taken aback. You have become an awakened. It's a transcendent one. He was quite proud of himself, but he nodded calmly. Unfortunately, it's only effective in the dream world. No matter which world you are in, you can no longer be considered a mortal, the ancient witch sighed sincerely. Behind the two chain stores is an indoor shopping mall. There should be a walkway connecting them. Let's find a hidden place to make our move. Be careful not to let others see us. Roland took Phyllis back to the fast food restaurant and found the back door of the shopping mall from the staff area. As he expected, the violent explosion scared away most of the customers, leaving the whole area in a mess. Roland did not follow the walkway to the Lon Road store. Instead, he asked Phyllis to unfold her blade claws and release the aura of magic power. If he remembered correctly, the fallen evil could sense the power and be attracted by the smell. In this way, the burnt-faced man mistook him for a martialist. Not long after, the back door of the Lon Road store exploded into pieces with a loud bang. A man roared and rushed out of the smoke-filled staff room, pouncing at Phyllis without saying a word. Thanks to the magical power, Roland's dynamic vision and reaction time had improved greatly. He could clearly see the appearance of the target. Different from the burnt-faced man, the red cyclone in the fallen evil's left palm was much smaller and brighter than the burnt-faced man's, so it should be true that the fallen evil had just mutated. In addition, from the frequency of the warm current surging in the fallen evil's body, Roland could tell that the desire was not as strong as the last time. According to the plan, the two of them would drag the fallen evil into the KFC restaurant. However, at this moment, the fallen evil suddenly stretched out his left arm toward Phyllis and opened his palm. In an instant, the air in front of the tequila witches expanded rapidly, creating shockwaves visible to the naked eye. Then the shockwaves exploded like a bomb and blasted the two of them directly into the kitchen of the restaurant. Roland, who was standing behind the witches, naturally became the meat cushion. He had a chance to avoid the impact, but considering that Phyllis did not have a strong body like a god's punishment warrior, he simply caught his teammate and bore the impact together. Under the impact of the shock wave, the two of them went through the soundproof wall and fell heavily in front of the fried chicken stand. Roland coughed and moved his back a little. Except for a little numbness, he did not feel any discomfort. It seemed that not only his strength but also his endurance had improved greatly. But was this the fallen evil's special ability? Hybrid demonic beasts could not attack like this. Roland was a little surprised. Why did the burnt-faced man, who was obviously more powerful, not use this ability? Are you okay? Roland looked at the witch lying in his arms. Sorry. I was careless. Phyllis slowly stood up with her head lowered. Her cheap short-sleeved shirt was torn in several places and one of the bone claws on her back was broken. Apparently, they had served as her shields at the moment of the explosion. But don't worry, the battle will be over soon. Soon after, the fallen evil walked in, panting. Seeing Phyllis, he gave a ferocious smile and stretched out his left hand again. Go to hell. Martialist. However, he did not notice that the broken claw under his feet did not disappear. Instead, it jumped up from the ground and slashed at his neck. A dim light flashed, and the fallen evil's ferocious smile froze on his face. Then his head slowly slid down and fell to the ground like a rag bag. Blood splashed high from the cut on his neck. Phyllis then controlled the broken claw to cut off the fallen evil's left hand and cut off the entire magic vortex with a precise cut. The headless body immediately fell to the ground. As long as it's not more than 10 steps away, the blade claws will be more threatening. Most enemies will ignore this and then attack from the back. Phyllis smiled and handed the crimson vortex to Roland. Is this the force of nature you mentioned? Yes, it's very similar to the magic vortex, right? Roland noticed that the vortex had completely stopped spinning after being separated from the fallen evil. It looked like a shining gem even when Phyllis picked it up. However, when it was in Roland's hand, the vortex spun rapidly and turned from crimson to bluish-white. Finally, it turned into a dazzling light that shot up to the ceiling and slowly dissipated in the air like a silver thread. Chapter 793. Phyllis asked in surprise, "This light is?" "I don't know. It's probably returning magic power to this world." Roland patted the dust off his hands and said, "We have to get out of here as soon as possible, or we'll be in trouble if someone sees us." "But isn't this guy an enemy?" "Yes, he's an enemy, but not everyone has the right to punish him," Roland explained. "Times have changed. Even the most vicious person can only be arrested and judged by a special department. Of course, fallen evils were even more special. Garcia had mentioned that martialists who dealt with fallen evils would be issued a hunting license by the association, which not only allowed them to kill suspicious targets, but also allowed them to legally kill normal awakened ones who tried to fish in troubled waters. If this matter was made public, it would undoubtedly cause a stir. "Strange times," Phyllis commented. When they walked out of the KFC, the chaos outside had begun to ease. The people who had not had time to escape were probably relieved to see the fallen evils suddenly leave. After a few steps, Roland saw Zero running against the flow of people all the way to him. She looked anxious, and the hair band on her head was untied. Her long white hair was scattered over her shoulders, looking very messy. Several people tried to stop her, but she dodged them with her small body and agile steps. When she saw Roland, her expression changed from anxiety to joy. But this joy only lasted for a few seconds. The little girl forcibly suppressed the smile on her face and said angrily, "Why did you run out so late? Even a tortoise runs faster than you, uncle." Looking at her panting and flushed face, Roland could not help but bend down and touch her head. "I'm sorry to have made you worry." "Who's worried about you?" "I'm worried about Sister Phyllis." Zero glared at him and said, "It's her first time in this city. What if she gets separated by the crowd?" Despite her words, the little girl obediently accepted the whole set of touching her head. After that, it took Roland a lot of effort to explain what had happened to them and why they had taken so long to get out. Of course, he made up the latter half of the story. She only calmed down when she learned that the two of them had been caught up in the attack of the fallen evils and were almost unable to escape. Fortunately, there were no more accidents during the rest of the trip. After Roland brought them to buy clothes, they went to the hot pot restaurant for dinner. As a delicacy with distinct characteristics, hot pot not only had a strong taste, but it was also relatively cheap. As long as he ordered some potatoes, vermicelli, and lotus root slices that were easy to fill, he could afford to eat until he was full. Phyllis's behavior was not much better than when she was in the KFC restaurant. The alternating stimulation of the spicy and fresh fragrance made her unable to stop her spoon. Her teary eyes were not sure whether it was because of the spiciness or because she was moved to tears. In the end, she even drank a lot of the fiery red oil soup, which stunned the people around her. It was already 9:00 in the evening when they returned to the apartment. Roland climbed to the 8th floor. When he reached the door of his apartment, he was surprised to see Garcia. She stood in the middle of the aisle with a frosty expression. She could almost feel the low pressure around her. "Has she been waiting for me here since I hung up the phone?" Roland twitched the corner of his mouth and said awkwardly, "You see, I really brought my relative out. Can we talk now?" Garcia interrupted him directly. Phyllis frowned, probably because Roland's tone was a little rude. "Burp. Please watch your attitude." She's the lord of the world. Roland hurriedly stopped her. Ahem, it's okay. Go back to your room first. I'll talk to her for a while. I'll be back soon. After all, he was the one in the wrong. If he had been stood up like this and turned off his cell phone with a poor excuse, he would have been furious. He had thought that a proud person like Garcia would be greatly disappointed and never want to talk to him again, but he did not expect that she would still insist on waiting for him here even after being brushed off so perfunctorily. Perhaps this meant that the Martialist Association had reached the point where they were short of manpower. Roland followed Garcia to number 0827. Before Roland sat down, she turned around and asked, "Have you made up your mind? Or, is this just an excuse and you don't want to join the association anymore?" Her eyes were burning as if she wanted to see through his thoughts. "Do you have water?" Roland shrugged, walked to the sofa, and sat down. "Iced water is fine too." Under the light, he seemed to see the blue veins on Garcia's forehead throbbing. Garcia took a deep breath, gnashed her teeth, and said, "I'll get it for you." "Thank you." After taking a sip of iced water, Roland said slowly, "I want to ask a question. Recently, there have been more and more reports about the fallen evils. Even when I was shopping today, I ran into a fallen evil who suddenly mutated. Is the Martialist Association in trouble? You were in the Green Valley Park area today." Garcia frowned. "You know about it too." "Someone called the police, but we have to deal with this kind of thing eventually. The association will contact the nearest martialists, and I'm one of them. That monster, it's dead, but we didn't do it. The core of nature is also gone," Garcia said in a low voice. "This proves that someone acted faster than us." "Who?" Roland asked, pretending to know nothing. "This question is out of line." Garcia shook her head. "In fact, I shouldn't even tell you what I said before, because it's related to the secrets of the association. As for your question, you're right. We're indeed in trouble. The erosion of the outside world is accelerating, and this world may face a big crisis." The erosion again. Roland's heart sank a little. What kind of crisis? No one knows the answer. Maybe the world will be destroyed, or everyone will become inhuman monsters. Because of this, the association needs more people to stand up and stop the erosion. This has nothing to do with gender, race, or national boundaries. Everyone who has awakened the force of nature should bear their own responsibility. At this point, Garcia's tone involuntarily became a little higher. "Indeed, in the fight against the erosion of the outside world, we may lose our lives, but this is the duty of martialists. I completely understand that you're afraid and hesitant, but please think about it. If even we don't fight, who else can protect everyone's safety?" Roland fell silent. Garcia's frankness really surprised him. Under normal circumstances, in order to avoid raising the price, the association should try its best to hide the difficulties faced by the association. However, Garcia not only indirectly admitted that the association was indeed short of manpower, but also mentioned responsibility and sacrifice, which was a little too frank. If other martialists persuaded newcomers to join the association like she did, he could somewhat understand why some people who had awakened the force of nature would rather face the attack of the fallen evils alone than join the association. After all, in this era, people's interest in righteousness had been greatly reduced, and self-interest was the first priority. Previously, Roland had planned to join the association only for the reward and fame, but now he felt that things might not be so simple. As one of the creators of the dream world, he felt that it was necessary to use the power of the Martialist Association to find out the reason for the mutation of the force of nature and what the erosion of the outside world was. Chapter 794. I've answered your question. What's your answer? Garcia could not help but ask after a long silence. Only then did Roland come back to his senses. "Ah, I'll enter." "WH. What?" She was stunned. "I'm willing to join." Roland spread out his hands. "Isn't that what you're asking?" "No. I just thought you You thought I ran away? He chuckled. I really went shopping with my relatives this afternoon. Why can't people trust each other more? But can I apply to join now? The senior you mentioned is the one who recommended me, right? Garcia's expression was a little stiff. She stared at Roland for a long time, as if she was considering whether she meant what she said. After a while, she shook her head and said, "He's just my teacher. I invited him here because I wanted him to guide you to better use the force of nature, but he won't see you anymore." Is it because I missed the appointment? Roland thought. It seemed that the senior was not only extremely disappointed in him, but also blamed Garcia. As for applying to join the association, you just need to fill out a form. She took out a piece of paper from under the tea table and handed it to him. It's effective after you sign your name. That's it? Roland was surprised. After all, it's an organization that secretly protects the world. Don't you need to go through some initiation ceremony or ability test? Garcia sneered coldly. Do you think you're joining the Priory of Antiquity or the Temple Knight group? This is modern society. Signing your name only means that your right to know is guaranteed. After that, the association will verify your identity and register you for a new social security and subsidy. She paused for a moment. As for the ability test, anyone who has awakened the force of nature is qualified to become a martialist. As for how far you can go, it all depends on your own willpower and efforts. The initial test can't prove anything. Well, I'm really not used to being talked to like this by someone who used to belong to the ancient royal family. Roland picked up the pen and was about to write down his name when he was stopped by the other party. I must remind you once again that once you become one of us, you will no longer be an ordinary person. You share the rights granted to you by the Martialist Association, but you also have to bear the corresponding obligations. You are not allowed to divulge information about the association, let alone betray the association. Otherwise, other martial artists will regard you as an enemy, and your subsequent punishment will not go through a court trial. I hope you'll think it over before you sign. She had clearly wanted him to join the association, but when it was time to submit the application, she reminded him to think carefully. This kind of open and above-board approach made Roland's opinion of her improve a lot. No matter how unscrupulous and ruthless the Queen of Clearwater was in the kingdom of Greycastle, in the dream world, she was completely different from the past. I know my choice. Roland nodded and signed his name. So, can you tell me about the erosion now? No. She carefully folded the form and put it in a wooden box under the tea table. It usually takes about 2 days to verify your identity. You've only submitted the application and haven't officially joined the Martialist Association, so this information still has to be kept confidential. Well, then let me change my question. You once said that you can get a generous reward for killing fallen evils, right? I've already explained this question clearly. Garcia's face showed some displeasure at the mention of working for money. I don't want to ask about the amount, but how can I confirm that I killed the fallen evils after the task is over? Roland shrugged. When you're hunting fallen evils, you can't bring your own camera or invite another martial artist to watch, right? Or do you plan to use the classical method of paying with your head? Is money that important to you? Garcia snapped. No matter who kills the fallen evils, it means that the world will be cleaner. Why do we have to be so clear? You're a famous martial artist, and the reward you can get from a single match is equivalent to an ordinary person's annual salary. 2 months ago, I didn't even have a job. In addition to supporting myself, I also had to take care of that little girl. So, you're right. Money is very important to me. Roland answered confidently. Following Garcia's train of thought and leading her in the wrong direction was a good thing. After all, as an outsider, from the very beginning, he had only planned to use the Martialist Association to find out the cause of the erosion, instead of getting himself involved. Besides, money was indeed very important to him. Garcia stared at him for a while and then said reluctantly, "Give the association the mutated force of nature as proof that you killed the fallen evils." I can give it to the association. Roland was a little surprised. didn't it dissipate when he held it in his hand? Was it not a coincidence that it was solid when Phyllis held it? Of course. This thing is not only the source of the fallen evil's power, but also the proof that they've been eroded. Once it mutates, the force of nature can't recover. If it's not collected and sealed properly, it'll infect a new host sooner or later. Ordinary people will lose their minds even if they simply touch it. You mean, it can be used by other people? That's why some people collect it, Garcia said resentfully. It's obvious what these lunatics are up to. Aren't they afraid that the world will be destroyed? Although she wasn't willing to reveal the details of the other party, and she only mentioned it out of anger, Roland could already tell that the people who opposed the association seemed to have formed an organized and purposeful hostile group, and they were stealing the business of the Martialist Association. But the association should also store a large amount of mutated force of nature, right? Aren't you worried that these guys might find out where it's stored, or that some of the Martialists deliberately colluded with the fallen evils? That's impossible. Garcia interrupted him without hesitation. Although you don't have the right to know this now, I can guarantee that those lunatics won't be able to break into the core area guarded by the Martialist Association. Before that, they'll be crushed into pieces by the four guardians. Roland wanted to ask where the core area was and who the four guardians were, but he knew that Garcia would not answer him, so he gave up. However, he still had a thought in his mind. If he entered the place where the mutated force of nature was stored and released all the magic vortexes, what would happen to the dream world? At that time, how powerful would the warm current and the strange power in his body be? You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.